on Zoom? Testing.
Yes, Jennifer Hardcastle can hear you. I don't know if everyone else is fine, but I can hear you.
Thank you, Ms. Hardcastle. All right. It's always fun to have the first meeting of any advisory board when we're working in new spaces and things. Thank you for your patience, everyone. Okay, so Jennifer Davidson, Assistant County Manager. I am going to call this meeting, the very first meeting of the Vacation Home Rental Advisory Board, to order. We do have a couple housekeeping measures. I would ask individuals in the audience to please consider silencing their cell phone. Those individuals participating on Zoom, if you can make sure that your microphone is off until you are called upon to speak, that would be great. We are going to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'll go ahead and lead the pledge. If you could all please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, at this point in the meeting, I will open with public comment. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker unless additional time is granted by the chairperson. At this point in the meeting, that is me, I am the chair. We will be transitioning to a new chair once one is elected. The Vacation Home Rental Advisory Board uses timing lights to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to speak. You will see a green light when you begin and then a yellow light which indicates that you have 30 seconds left and should conclude your comments. Once the light turns red, please sit down. It looks like we don't actually have our timer, so I'll be the indicator. I will use hand signals. When you have 2 minutes left, I'll raise 2 fingers, 1 when you have 1 minute remaining. In addition to opening public comment will also be taken on administrative items that are listed for possible action. At this time, public comment will be taken on those items that are within the jurisdiction and control of the Vacation Home Rental Advisory Board. Do we have any public comment? If so, please approach the podium at the front, and if you need some assistance with a microphone, we'd be happy to help you. Seeing none in the audience, is there any public comment, opening public comment on Zoom?
Thank you, Ms. Davidson. Marsha Johnson for the record. I do not have any attendees. I only have panelists online. If you would like to provide opening public comment, please raise your hand for the panelists. No response, so no public comment at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. All right, at this point, we will move to approval of the agenda. May I have a motion to approve the agenda, please?
So moved.
Do I have a second? I have a motion by Ms. Romaine, a second by Mr. Byer. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed indicate by saying nay. All right, we have the agenda approved, 5-0. Moving on to the administrative agenda. Our first item, for possible action. Discussion and possible action to draw lots to establish alternating lengths of terms of appointment for each of the members to the Douglas County Vacation Home Rental Advisory Board. 3 members of the advisory board will randomly draw 4-year terms expiring on December 31st, 2025. The remaining 2 members will randomly draw 2-year terms expiring on December 31st, 2023. Members of the advisory board will draw lots in alphabetical order. Before I conduct the drawing of lots, I will call for public comment. Is there any public comment on this item? I don't see any public comment in the gallery. Ms. Johnson, do we have any public comment on Zoom?
Thank you, Ms. Davidson. We do not have any attendees at this time, so no public comment.
Thank you. Before we proceed with the drawing of lots, I will just advise the advisory board that it was brought to our attention actually almost immediately after we adopted the ordinance back in July, that there was an issue with the wording in the ordinance on terms for advisory board members. The way it is structured in the ordinance currently is that terms are for 4 years and they're intended to be alternating. The way we have it structured now, it's going to mean in 2 years, in 4 years, all 5 positions are going to be replaced, and that is not the intent of the ordinance. So for a housekeeping measure, I'm just noting this, that may be a recommendation we may need to make at a future meeting to the Board of County Commissioner as a possible change to the ordinance. All right, so we'll begin with the drawing of lots. Sure, let's go ahead. I'll call for a motion. Mr. Byer?
I move the members of the advisory board should draw lots to establish alternating lengths of term of appointment of each of the members of the Douglas County Vacation Home Rental Advisory Board. 3 members of the advisory board will randomly draw 4-year terms expiring in December 31st, 2025. The remaining 2 members will randomly draw 2-year terms expiring in December 31st, 2023. Members of the advisory board should draw lots in alphabetical order.
And I hate to make you redo that. Do you mind doing that with your microphone on, please, sir?
Sorry about that.
Just so we can catch you in the recording.
I move the members of the advisory board should draw lots to establish alternating lengths of term of appointment for each of the members of the Douglas County Vacation Home Rental Advisory Board. 3 members of the advisory board will randomly draw 4-year terms expiring in December 31st, 2025. The remaining 2 members will randomly draw 2-year terms expiring in December 31st, 2023. Members of the advisory board should draw lots in alphabetical order.
May I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Sloan. We have a motion by Mr. Byer, a second by Mr. Sloan. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Point of clarification.
Yes, ma'am.
If the code does not state what we're doing here, can we actually do that?
The code does state this process as is discussed in the motion.
Okay, I thought it said it was all of us have 4 years, not what we're stating here.
No, the code does state that the first process will have alternating 2 individuals selecting 2-year terms.
I'm good, then I'm a yes.
Okay, great. So just for clarification, I'll call for the vote one more time. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, that was unanimous 5-0. We will draw lots. If we can go down the line, beginning with Mr. Byer, please state your name for the record and the length of your term.
Brian Keith Byer, 4-year term, expires December 2025.
Patty Graff, 4-year term, expires December 2025.
Mickey Hempler, 2-year term, expires December 2023.
Lauren Romaine, a 4-year term.
Michael Sloan, 2-year term, expires December 2023.
Thank you for that. And now my favorite part of the meeting. Item number 2 for possible action. Discussion on the election of the chairperson and vice chairperson of the Douglas County Vacation Home Rental Advisory Board in compliance with the county boards, committees, and commissions policies and procedures. At this point, I would turn it over to the board for discussion. Prior to calling for a motion, comment on this. So if you have any discussion or any possible nominations, I would entertain those at this point. Please indicate by raising your hand if you wish to speak. Ms. Romaine.
So first of all, we don't need a motion for this part. Is that right? Or do you need a motion?
Not just yet. We're
Okay.
going to do nominations
Gotcha.
and discussion, and then we'll call for public comment prior to calling for the motion.
Okay. Can we talk about one particular, the chairperson first, or do you want? Okay, so I would like to put forward Mickey Hempler's name for chairperson. She has been dogged at working on this issue for as long as we have been for, I don't even know how many, has it been at least 2 years now, years, and is very knowledgeable, so, and is very professional, and I think can handle this position very well. So, thank you.
Any additional discussion or further nominations? Mr. Byer.
Are we doing both positions or just the chairman right now?
We can do them one at a time, or we can discuss both.
I
at
would
this
like
point.
to suggest we do both at one time, and I would like to put Lauren Romaine's name forward as vice chair, because I think that creates a little bit of a balance. One's a permanent holder, one isn't, and I know we don't represent those constituencies, but I think as we move through time, it would be good to have both people in those roles, so I would recommend those two individuals.
Any further discussion or nominations at this point? Seeing none, I'll call for public comment from the gallery. There it goes.
You did do it. Ellie Waller, just a point of clarification with the 2-year and 4-year appointees, will the chair and vice chair be reelected every 2 years based on somebody being in a 2-year versus a 4-year slot?
Thank you for your question, Ms. Waller. I would be happy to answer that. So the chair and vice chair will need to be reelected each January, and so that will be considered annually. Are there any additional questions or comments from the gallery? Seeing none at this point, Ms. Johnson, do we have anyone who wishes to participate public comment on Zoom?
Thank you, Ms. Davidson. Marsha Johnson for the record. At this time, there are no attendees, so no public comment.
All right, thank you. At this point, I will turn it back to the board for a motion or additional discussion. Mr. Byer.
I move we elect Mickey Hempler, the chair of the Douglas County Vacation Home Rental Advisory Board, and Lauren Romaine, and elect Lauren Romaine, the vice chair of the Douglas County Vacation Home Rental Board.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Sloan. I have a motion by Mr. Byer, a second by Mr. Sloan. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, seeing none, we have a chair and vice chair. At this point, we're going to take a 3-minute recess so we can play musical chairs and get everyone in their appropriate locations, and I can turn over the microphone.
I think we're
Thank you
good.
for your patience.
Recording stopped.
Only, training on Nevada's open meeting law by
Recording in progress.
by District Attorney's Office. Mr. Ritchie.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman, and congratulations. I appreciate your service on your inaugural meeting. I'm going to go over Nevada's open meeting law. So we know how to share the screen.
Sorry. Jack of all trades today.
A woman of many talents.
There you go.
So in Nevada, the law requires that public bodies conduct their meetings in public, which makes sense. The liberties of people never were nor ever will be secure when the transactions of their rulers may be concealed from them. Patrick Henry. So from the very foundation of our nation, we believed that the people should be involved in the democratic process and know what their rulers are doing. All public bodies exist to aid in the conduct of the people's business. It is the intent of the law that their actions be taken openly and that deliberations be conducted openly. I'll cut to the chase. There's some simple elements for the open meeting law. The first is do not come together as a quorum of task force members to discuss business unless at a public meeting that has been properly noticed and the agenda has been published. And obviously quorum is a simple majority of a 5-member board. That means 3 or more of you, you're subject to the open meeting law. To deliberate towards a decision or take action on a matter the task force has supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power. So, can a public body like the Board of County Commissioners avoid the open meeting law by delegating authority to a blue ribbon commission, subcommittee, or advisory group like the VHR advisory board to deliberate or take action on its behalf? Do you think it's possible just to get around the open meeting law by delegating it? Of course, no. That's why you are subject to the open meeting law. The key question is, has the public body delegated de facto authority to the committee or advisory panel to act on its behalf? And in this case, the board has. You have the ability to hear appeals. You make recommendations on changes to the VHR advisory ordinance to the board. Again, it does not matter what the committee is called. If it is acting on behalf of the public body, in this case, the Board of County Commissioners, and you're acting with its authority, then you're subject to the open meeting law. It's important to note that because your authority has been delegated, your jurisdiction control is very narrow. It's found within basically Title 20 of the county code, and it is very limited to those issues that the board has delegated to you. So for instance, issues regarding staff should use a certain software program, or whether we should do audits or things like that. You can certainly make recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners regarding changes to the ordinance, but as far as the administrative process, that's not within this body's jurisdiction and control. So kind of begs the question, what is a meeting? A meeting under the open meeting law means the gathering of members of a public body at which a quorum is present to deliberate toward a decision or to take action on a matter, again, over which the body has supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power. So for instance, if the board wanted to meet on, have a social luncheon and get together and talk about the weather, you could do that. You could even talk about whether roads should be built, because you don't have any jurisdiction and control over roads. Your jurisdiction control is very limited. But to the extent that you start talking about those things that are within your jurisdiction and control, you cannot do that if there's more than 2 of you present at that time. Now again, I can't emphasize this enough. The open meeting law only applies to collective deliberation or action by public officials. 1 or 2 officials, in the absence of a majority, is powerless to set policies, direct staff, or to otherwise deliberate or act. There must be a quorum to take action and to violate the open meeting law. So when in doubt, if there's 3 of you present, be very careful about what you're talking about. If there's 2 of you, you can talk about anything you want. Now there is, of course, a danger. A meeting also includes any series of gatherings of members of the public body at which less than a quorum is present at any individual gathering, and the members of the public body attending 1 or more of the gatherings collectively constitute a quorum, and the series of gatherings were held with a specific intent to avoid the open meeting law. So what does that mean? I think most of you know, but so what is considered taking action under the open meeting law? A decision that is made by a majority of the members of the elected body, for instance, voting on whether to grant an appeal, deny an appeal, or modify some proposed action. A commitment or promise made by a majority of the members regarding some sort of action that the board might take regarding changing the ordinance, making a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, and of course a vote taken by a majority of the members. What does it mean to deliberate? Deliberate means collectively to examine, weigh, and reflect upon the reasons for or against the action. The term includes without limitation the collective discussion or exchange of facts preliminary to the ultimate decision. So basically there's two steps, right? You deliberate over something and then you vote or take action on that. And the open meeting law covers both aspects of this. It's not just the vote that's covered, it's the discussion that leads up to the vote that's covered. So I'll give you your first test question. What if board member Sam meets with a board member Eric to discuss an upcoming appeal and tells them the appeal has no merit? Has there been a violation of the open meeting law? Vicki, I see you shaking your head no. You're right, there isn't. And why is that?
Because there's only 2.
There's only 2. 2 members of a 5-member board do not constitute a quorum, cannot deliberate or take action, and therefore cannot violate the open meeting law. But what if Sam then meets with board member Patrick, tells him what he and Eric discussed, and confirms the 3 of them will deny the upcoming appeal? Yes, there has been a violation of the open meeting law by this board, because where there was 2, now it's a serial communication. You went and talked to a 3rd person, said, here's what we've talked about, here's what we're going to do, and all of that should occur in public. When in doubt, if there's something that you feel is important or relevant to something you're about to vote on or consider, do it in a public meeting. That way the public can see what you thought was important. They can see what questions you asked. That way they understand why the vote went the way it did. They can kind of understand why the board was thinking the way it was, voted the way it did. There are exceptions to the open meeting law. Seminars, conferences, and workshops are a very good example. Unless the facts show that a quorum of the board has deliberated and taken action, attendance at seminars, conferences, and workshops do not fall under the definition of a meeting found in Nevada law, even if the presentations touch on subjects within the scope of the board's jurisdiction. For instance, if at some point in the future you collectively wanted to go to some training offered by the Attorney General's office, or maybe VHR seminar somewhere to learn more about VHR issues that are affecting the nation, BRBOs, how they're affecting property prices, things like that. You could do that as a group, even though it's over a subject over which you will eventually deliberate. Again, does that give you license that while you're at the conference say, that's a great idea. I think when we get back home, we should do X, Y, or Z. No. You can talk about what you learn. I mean, it's educational, right? You're learning more about the topic so that when you come back here and you make these kind of decisions, you're more informed. But when you make those decisions, when you have those discussions, it's in the public. Again, so people can understand, why did they do that? Why did they think that way? Social gatherings are another example. Again, I mentioned a luncheon. Social gatherings where a quorum of the board may be present are specifically exempted from the open meeting law. However, do not attempt to circumvent the law by deliberating over issues over which the board has jurisdiction and control, using the social gathering or conference as a pretext for a meeting. Here's another little quiz. I've used this before. 4 members of the Clark County Board of Commissioners, 4 of 7, belong to a social group known as Housing Opportunities for the Public, HOPE, that encourages developers to include affordable housing in any new developments within Clark County. HOPE members meet informally each week at a local bakery, have some coffee and donuts, and communicate regularly with each other through Nextdoor, a social media platform. All 4 commissioners have publicly stated at HOPE meetings that they support HOPE's policies and will support any development that includes at least 40% affordable housing. HOPE members are excited about a new multi-use development that has more than 60% affordable housing. An upcoming agenda item involves an application by this developer, and the 4 commissioners have told the members of HOPE and each other through Nextdoor that they will definitely vote for the project. Do you see any problems with what's been going on? Again, they were meeting socially, right? They're having coffee, donuts. They belong to a constituent outreach program. But there is a problem because there's a majority of them, and they're talking about something over which they have jurisdiction and control, and specifically over something that they're going to be considering. I tried to think of an example that might involve you, but it's kind of hard because you're limited to appeals. Due to the nature of social media, there has been a violation of the open meeting law. Social media has been defined as the collective sharing of online communications dedicated to community-based input, interaction, content sharing, and collaboration. As a social media platform, the intent of the medium is to publicly share messages to its members as an avenue for communication. It's ripe for deliberation and pre-decisional activities that occur outside the view of the public. Social media today reminds me a lot of the old days of like Chicago, the backroom deals, the smoky rooms. The people in the club talked about what was going to happen and made the decisions before they ever walked into a public room to make a vote. That is what the open meeting law is intended to avoid. Again, in this example, quorum of the public body are members of the social media platform, Nextdoor. It could be anything, Facebook. I mean, there's tons of them. And regularly use it to communicate with each other and the other members of HOPE. Any serial communication or walking quorum is prohibited as it is considered collective deliberation by the board members toward a decision. And that's Attorney General versus Board of Regents. Now, what about staff updates? You may meet with staff. Tom Dallaire is the Director of Community Development, may meet with code enforcement staff, and that's allowable. There is no violation of the open meeting law if there's less than a majority and you're receiving information, even if it's about some upcoming item, an appeal, some issue with the code that needs to be changed. The Nevada Supreme Court has held that briefings of less than a quorum of the public body by staff do not violate the open meeting law as long as there's no deliberation by those being briefed and the members are not polled as to how they will vote. So obviously, if sorry to pick on Mr. Dallaire, but he's a great guy, so I will. If he was meeting with 2 of you and going over an appeal, and 2 of you said, I think there's a real problem with this appeal because of X, Y, Z, if Tom then met with 2 other members and gave the same briefing, that's fine. But if he then shared with, by the way, these other two members felt this way, that would then, you would have a walking quorum, a collective deliberation. Members of a public body may individually discuss matters with staff because the open meeting law only prohibits collective deliberations or actions where a quorum is present. Again, that's another Nevada Supreme Court case. Again, I'll keep referring to this. It's about the quorum. It's about collective action, deliberation, and voting. Again, I gave this away. So what if one member of the VHR task force repeats her private conversations with county staff during these private meetings with all of the other task force members to convince them to vote a certain way? Is this a violation? This is kind of a trick question, actually. But the answer is yes. If, I'll pick on Mickey because she's the chairwoman. If she talks to each of you individually, that's fine. It's dangerous. I don't recommend it, but you can. But as soon as she says, I talked to X, and then I spoke to Y, and I spoke to Z, and this is what we all think, and this is what we should do, that's, again, collective action, collective deliberation. It's very dangerous to have these discussions outside of an open meeting. Technically, it's a majority, a quorum, but once you have two, if either of you independently talk to a third member about what you've said, you've got a quorum. So the best practice is, if you think it's important, have the discussion here. That way the board will let the public know what you think is relevant and why you're voting the way you are. What if Patrick sends a mass email to the other board members asking them to vote in favor of an upcoming appeal and explains why he is voting in favor of dismissing a fine? Is this a possible violation of the open meeting law? Yeah, you've sent a mass email to everybody. This could be considered a serial communication that involves a quorum once one or two of the members respond. All of the members of the board now know how Patrick will vote, why they should vote in favor of the approving the appeal or dismissing the fine, and they also know exactly why he's going to vote that way. Again, please do not send mass emails or reply to all in your email communications. It's easy to do. Staff is pretty good about not sending out mass emails, but if you ever inadvertently get one, just delete it, don't respond. Mass communications, electronics, social media are great, but they're a real minefield when it comes to open meeting law. Because again, if you feel the question is important or the point you want to make is important, make it in a public meeting so everybody can hear it. And I'm sorry if I keep hammering on that, but that's the biggest area of concern. The majority of open meeting law complaints involve these kind of serial communications outside of a public context. The Attorney General has been concerned about the use of electronic devices during public meetings. Because all deliberations must occur in a public forum, privately texting or emailing messages to other commissioners during a meeting or sharing information via social media outside of the public's view will likely be considered a violation of the law. And it goes without saying, if you're texting your fellow members about, oh, that was a stupid thing, or, what about this point? That should be happening in public, right? That way the public can hear you say, maybe not that was a stupid point, but that, I'm not buying that, or that doesn't sound credible, or what about this mitigating factor? That way everyone knows what you think is relevant. And before I continue, let me say that a lot of the decisions you're going to make someone unhappy, right? Somebody probably complained about a VHR, and so staff went out and found out, yep, there's a problem. They issued a citation, and then they appeal it. Someone's going to be upset. The courts are required to give deference to the decisions of elected bodies or representative bodies. In this case, you're an appointed body, a public body. There's what's called an abuse of discretion standard. Basically, the court should not and will not substitute its own judgment for yours. As long as there's something in the record that shows, yeah, this is a reasonable person could come to that conclusion. Maybe I wouldn't, but you certainly could. One of the easiest ways to show an abuse of discretion is if you publicly state before the meeting has even occurred, I'm going to vote against this because of X, Y, Z. In other words, before you even heard all the evidence, to use a courtroom term, before you've heard the evidence, you've already decided what's going to happen. Judges disfavor that for obvious reasons. I mean, your vote may not change. The information you obtain may sway your vote, but at least allow both sides to say their piece, ask the questions, follow-up questions, and then you can vote. Nothing can give an attorney a better shot at overturning a valid decision of this board than by making it look like the process was unfair, that the matter had been prejudged. They didn't even have a chance when they walked in the door. I applaud your willingness to serve the public, to serve on this body. It's a new body. Give everyone a fair chance to be heard. Again, all public officials must be extremely cautious about committing how you will vote until you have heard all the evidence presented to you at a public hearing. Let us assume that a VHR owner tells staff that he has received enough votes to get a special use permit approved before staff has made a recommendation or a public hearing has even occurred. Such commitments not only deny the public a right to be heard, but also exposes the VHR task force to allegations that they have violated the open meeting law. It can also be potentially embarrassing when, after you hear all the facts, you change your mind and do not support, the proposal. Just don't do it. I will note this: there's nothing in the open meeting law that prohibits a board member from meeting with members of the public to receive feedback and information about an upcoming agenda item. You can go out and go to the property and look at it and see if there's a problem with the deck or the railing or whatever the issue may be. But it's dangerous. It's dangerous to go out there. If you do that, please let staff know. I went out there and this is what I saw. That way staff can go out there, verify it, and then present it to the rest of the board members. Because if you thought it was relevant, odds are your fellow members will also find it relevant. Again, the idea is transparency in government, openness. Everybody's on the same playing field. Everybody has the same information, particularly the public. They want to know the same information that you have when you make a decision. The Nevada Supreme Court has stated, we have not acknowledged that the open meeting law is not intended to prohibit every private discussion of a public issue. Instead, the open meeting law only prohibits collective deliberations or actions where a quorum is present. Probably heard that before, huh? Do any of you have any questions regarding these issues?
Just a couple of clarifications, and the first is, Keith Byer for the record. You mentioned that we were not to get involved in the administrative county business, and I think I understand that, but
Right.
part of this process is about administration, isn't it? I mean, so we're making recommendations to the county commissioners. You're saying that none of those recommendations would ever imply an administrative procedure?
Thank you. That's a great question. Let me rephrase your question. If what you're looking at involves a change to the Title 20 to the code, then yes. If it doesn't involve a change that's required in the county code, then no. For instance, I saw this great software program that you can use to track all this stuff. That's not a policy decision that would come to the county commissioners, and you don't put, we're going to use this Microsoft Word in county code. That's just an example. Again, your input is very valuable on high-level policy. These are the things we're seeing as we sit, we hear these appeals, reoccurring problems. Board, this is what we found. We have some ideas, recommendations for you. It's that policy level, strategic, 1,000-foot view. That's where you will be invaluable, to be honest. I mean, staff are kind of in the trenches, right? Every day they get these calls, they go out, they look, they interact. That's not really how the most valuable use of your time. Yours is to process all of these complaints, saying, we see a trend here. We see a problem. Let's not keep beating our head against the wall. Let's figure out a way to make this a better and more efficient program, because we want it to succeed. Here's some basic rules about Nevada's open meeting law. Basically, you can just rely on staff. They do this all the time for all kinds of meetings, but except in an emergency, written notice of all meetings must be given by 9 a.m. at least 3 business days before the meeting. The agenda topics must be clear and complete to alert the public to the specific matters that will be discussed by the board. If action might be taken by the board, the item must be designated for possible action on the agenda. The agenda should also state that items may be combined, taken out of order, or removed, continued, and also any restrictions on public comment, including when it will be allowed. I use this example all the time because I thought it was hilarious. On being vague, an unnamed committee of unknown members will apparently be tasked with yet to be determined duties regarding the unspecified actions of the Sarasota Police Department for an undetermined period of time under the guidance of an unknown law enforcement consultant. It's from the Islander Reporter in Lee County, Florida. That tells the public what they're doing, right? Again, must be clear and complete. A higher degree of specificity is needed if an agenda item is of significant interest to the public. What that means is if you know a lot of people care about it and are going to show up for public comment, you need to be more clear so they know, yeah, this is what we're talking about, and we know you have an interest in it. There is, I will acknowledge, a conflict between clear and complete. A complete agenda title would include everything in the background and supporting materials, but it would not be clear. In other words, the title to the agenda item would be several paragraphs long or longer if it was truly complete. The idea is a nice balance to give enough information so that people know, oh, I have an interest in this. I better show up and hear what they have to say. That way, if I have something to say, I'll have a chance to speak up. Again, stick to the agenda. Make the agenda topics clear and then stick to the agenda. Please do not wander from the scope of the topic contained in the title of the agenda item. Minutes must be kept of every meeting and must reflect the date, time, and place of the meeting, the members who are present and absent, the substance of all matters proposed, discussed, or decided, and the substance of any remarks made by the public or a copy of his or prepared written statements. I'm going to read to you an agenda item. This is an actual agenda item. It's from Sandoval versus Board of Regents. The agenda item stated, quote, review of UCCSN policies on reporting, end quote. So do any of you want to go to that meeting? I understand the need for abbreviations, but unless you speak the lingo, I have no idea what UCCSN is. And I don't know what policies they're going to be talking about. Maybe it's their book buying policy, or maybe it's about something else. The background says, review UCCSN state and federal statutes, regulations, case law, and policies that govern the release of materials, documents, and reports to the public. Okay, I have a little more information. Sounds kind of dry. Release of materials, documents, and reports to the public. Okay, I might want to come to that. Well, later it turns out that the committee discussed a controversial NDI, Nevada Division of Investigations report regarding a dormitory raid by UNLV police. One of the regents discussed the details of the raid, criticized the UNLV police department, and recommended that the police department be disarmed on campus. Do you think that's a little more spicy? Do you think more people might want to participate in that public discussion? The AG felt so, and there was a violation of open meeting law. Again, the agenda needs to be complete enough so that an ordinary person can understand what you're going to be talking about. Now, if they want to get into the guts of it, a great example is an ordinance. An ordinance may be like VHR ordinance. Proposal to change section 20.122 regarding possible caps on VHR permits. That tells you a number of things. Doesn't tell you all the details, but it tells you enough that you may want to look more into it and actually show up at the meeting. Again, this is another area where you can easily go astray. Stick to the agenda. Don't go astray. Trust in the staff. They deal with a lot of these agenda items, a lot of controversial items. And again, if you want something on the agenda, they can help you prepare it, draft it so that what you want to discuss can be put on the agenda and everybody can hear what your thoughts are on a topic. On public comment, the public must be given at least 2 opportunities to provide comment, once before the board takes any action, and either prior to the adjourning of the meeting or before the board takes action on each item, but after the board has discussed the issue. So again, there's 2 times. One, before you do anything, before you take any action, and then either at the end of the meeting or as you're going through the agenda and you're taking action on each one, you can take public comment on each of those as well. The Board of County Commissioners, we do a belt and suspenders approach. We do opening public comment on action items generally, and then closing public comment. Again, it's within the jurisdiction and control of the board. The chair generally decides what that will be. So does before taking any action include the public bodies approving the prior board minutes or the current agenda? No. You wouldn't think so, right? It's not real. I mean, it's not real business. We're just approving the old minutes. Well, somebody had a fight over it, and there was a fight over the minutes, the approval of the minutes. And so, yes, approving the agenda is not merely a ministerial act. As long as an item is for possible action and requires a vote, then the board is taking action, and public comment must occur before that for possible action item occurs. I know it seems kind of silly, right? It's a ministerial act. We're approving the agenda, for heaven's sakes. That's to get us started. In our own county, we've had an issue with that where we couldn't get a quorum to vote to approve the agenda. So there's that. Can the VHR task force respond to something that's brought up under public comment? There seems to be this misunderstanding that no, you can't respond to them. Yes, board members can ask clarifying questions to the individual, and the board can also take action to the extent that it can ask staff to put the issue on a future agenda item for deliberation and action. What you can't do is a member of the public brings up a great point, and then you start discussing that great point and vote to say, yeah, we should fund, whatever great thing needs to be funded. Because the public had no idea you were going to do that. What you can do is somebody brings up public comment, you can ask a clarifying question, and then you can kind of say, staff, will you bring that on our next agenda so we can have that discussion? Again, the best practice, I know this sounds harsh, particularly since I'm a big advocate for transparency and public participation, but the best practice is not to respond during public comment. You heard what they had to say, staff heard what they had to say. During your 2-on-1 staff briefings, you can say, remember during our last meeting, Mr. Ritchie brought up this point. Could you put that on the agenda? It's just best not to respond, because then it's very easy to go from asking clarifying questions into, let's do this. Let's save the puppies. Let's fund that because it's a great thing. Again, what if a citizen begins to make a complaint to the VHR task force about an ethical violation of a county commissioner or other public officer? Should the board allow them to continue to speak? If this member of the public feels that an ethics violation occurred, they need to be referred to the Ethics Commission. That's what they do. Under Nevada's open meeting law, any discussion regarding someone's character, competence, or alleged misconduct requires written advance notice to the individual. I call it the, golden rule. I want to treat others as you'd like to be treated. If you're going to speak poorly about someone, then give them notice so they can show up and defend themselves. Ideally, though, again, getting back to building a good record, stick to the facts. Build a good record. If you start making personal attacks on someone, then it looks like you're more being arbitrary and capricious because I'm voting against you because I just don't like you, versus the facts and circumstances of each particular case. A public body may place limitations on caustic personal attacks made by members of the public during the public comment period. Again, this is open meeting law opinion. It's also, there's also a case, federal case on it. In other words, there are limits to the First Amendment freedom of speech. The public body may not inform the public that it is legally prohibited from discussing public comments, because that's not true. However, comments that are offensive, disruptive, or overly repetitive may be terminated. You don't need to hear, just because somebody got all of his neighbors to come up and say the exact same thing, you don't have to hear it 50 times. We get what you're saying. If you want, you can come up and say ditto. Comments that are critical of the public policy decision, the public body must not be censored. However, personal attacks, again, should not be allowed. Reasonable time limits and the enforcement of other reasonable rules and regulations to ensure the orderly conduct of the meeting are allowed. However, any rules must be clearly expressed on each agenda. Just let us know what the rules are and we'll follow them. And the chairperson has the discretion to allow more time. If you feel like somebody needs a little more time, again, you're trying to build a good record. You don't want to feel like you don't want a judge looking at this and felt, boy, they cut off the people. You can tell where they were going. They cut off everybody that was pro and let everybody that was con go on and on and on. If a person willfully disrupts a meeting to the extent that it is impractical for the public body to continue its business, the person may be removed from the meeting and may be charged with a misdemeanor. So it is serious. I mean, this is not my venue to speak. It is for the public. I will also note this. People have this idea that they can say whatever they want and free from defamation claims. Members of the public, no. The short answer is no. You slander somebody in a public forum, you will probably have some problems. The chairperson, there are some exceptions for you because you're members of the public body, but members of the public have to be truthful when they're testifying before you, speaking during public comment. They alleged open meeting law because the chair recessed the meeting and said, "Well, you need to take a vote." It's like, no. The chair, that's part of their powers, is we'll take a recess so we can get a constable or somebody in here to clear out the rioters. Any questions about basic rules or public comment? Yes.
Sorry, Keith Meyer for the record. And I don't know whether to bring this up now or then, but there's a timer normally, and like on a school board, you have a secretary who does that role, but since we don't have a budget, we don't approve things, I guess we don't have a secretary, so who will time public comment each meeting? Because I expect public comment to be sometimes contentious. So, I mean, who will time that? Will it be staff or one of us, or we don't? Because there's no secretary position. There's no other position except chairwoman and vice chairwoman. So, who will do that? Is that a question for later on? The other item?
Madam Chair, if I may answer that question.
Thank you, Ms. Davidson.
we're getting our practice in this afternoon. Thank you for the question, Mr. Byer. So for today, because the chair has not made decisions on how she would like to run the meeting just yet, if it is the desire of the chairperson to limit public comment to the extent that she does, I will serve as timekeeper. If she would like to see that role played out in the future, we will either arrange for a staff member to perform that function or a member of the board at her request.
Any other questions? Yes.
Michael Sloan, for the record. So we have to notify the public 3 days ahead. Is it just by our website or is it social media? How does the public actually know? I know we have a few people here, but how do they know?
That is a great question. And the open meeting law provides required postings. It's posted here, physically posted. There are numerous ways that the public is notified of these hearings. Probably the easiest way today is just go on the internet, go on the county's website, and it's posted. Here's another important exception to the open meeting law that you may want to take advantage of. Nevada law specifically excludes attorney-client meetings with the board's attorney related to either potential or existing litigation from the requirements of the open meeting law. So these meetings are actually excluded from the definition of meeting. That is why attorney-client meetings are sometimes called quote-unquote non-meetings by the Attorney General's office. Obviously, you're having a meeting because you're meeting together, but it's not a meeting for purpose of the definition under Nevada's open meeting law. Again, they're excluded from the definition. So what if something happens and you think a violation has occurred? If you become aware during a meeting that an OML violation has occurred or you think one has occurred, you should take steps to cure it right at the meeting. And the law allows this. Improper notice of meeting. If, for instance, you find out that it wasn't posted on the website like you thought, and it's brought to your attention, the board should convene for the sole purpose of rescheduling the meeting and adjourn. Discussions of the significance that occurred before the discovery should be repeated at the next meeting, because anything that occurred in violation of the OML is void. If you discuss items that are not on the agenda, stop the discussion and schedule it for a future meeting. You start with one topic and it kind of leads off to another. Realize that you went too far astray and say, let's get back to the agenda and let's put that up. That is a good thing. That's a good topic. We'll bring it up on the next agenda. Taking action on discussion-only items for presentation only, that action is void and you need to reschedule. If you're going to take action, it has to be for possible action. That way the people know that you're not just talking about it, you're going to vote on it. If you find yourself talking about an item with a quorum during a break of a meeting, when you reconvene, you should disclose on the record what was discussed. And this has happened, obviously. We'll take a break, you're going out, getting a drink of water, two of you are talking, and then before you know it, you don't even notice that the third person walks up. And you might talk about, boy, did you hear that last thing? If you notice that, it's okay. Come back in. When the meetings reconvene, say, when we were out there, we were taking a drink of water, and, Doug, Jennifer, and Sam were all there, and this is what we said. So now everybody knows what we said. Everybody now knows whatever it was we happened to say. Again, it's very important you take steps to cure, because under the open meeting law, you can cure it, and it's not a violation. I have discussions with some members of the public. They say, well, you violated the open meeting law. No, we didn't violate the open meeting law. There was a problem that we cured at the meeting, so there wasn't a violation. This is something you might want to pay attention to. Individual penalties. Each member of the public body that attends a meeting in violation of the OML with knowledge of the violation is guilty of a misdemeanor and is subject to a civil penalty of $500 for the first offense, $1,000 for the second, and $2,500 for every offense thereafter. It could also subject you to removal from office. The good news, though, is that any action taken by a public body in violation of the open, well, that's not good news. It's any action taken by a public body in violation of the open meeting law is void. Any suit to declare any action void must be brought within 60 days of the alleged violation unless told for an additional 30 days under certain circumstances. That's the good news, that there is a time limit within which someone can challenge an action by the board, which makes sense. If the board not this board, but like say the Board of County Commissioners voted to fund the construction of a new building and issued a $100 million bond, we need to know as soon as possible if there's a problem with that. Otherwise, a bond has been issued, investors have bought the bonds, we started building the building. So I think the legislature wisely said, look, we're going to give you some time, but you can't wait forever. If you think there's a violation, speak up. Here's the really good news. All penalties that have an impact on individual board members and not on the board collectively require a showing of a willful violation. So you will not be found personally liable unless there's a willful violation. Getting the advice of legal counsel and following it in good faith will protect you from personal liability, always. NRS states, no criminal penalty or administrative fine may be imposed upon a member of a public body pursuant to this section if a member of a public body violates a provision of this chapter as a result of legal advice provided by an attorney employed or retained by the public body. So, attorneys are kind of like your insurance policy. If you follow their advice in good faith, you will not be found personally liable. Does that mean the action may be declared void and you have to do it over again? Yes. Because again, we want transparency in government, but you will not be personally fined or jailed if it was not a willful violation. Any questions? The goal in requiring that deliberations take place at meetings that are open and public is that committee members make a conscientious effort to hear viewpoints on each issue so that the community can understand on what their premises are based, add to those premises when necessary, and intelligently evaluate and participate in the process of government. I think that sums it up perfectly. It's transparency. People understand why you're doing what you're doing. They can give you information to help inform your decision, and that any decision occurs so the public can see it. There's additional resources. The Nevada Open Meeting Law Manual is available. I'm not sure if we're making copies available. It's online. It's fairly thick. I didn't bring my binder. But again, if you ever have any questions, feel free to talk to staff, talk to one of the attorneys, the deputy DAs. Deputy DA Sam Taylor knows a lot about it. He's assigned to help you. In conclusion, I appreciate your willingness to serve. It's not fun. It's going to take some time, but the work you're going to do is invaluable for our community. With that, do you have any questions? All right. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Ritchie. I'm sure you'll hear from some of us down the road. The next thing on the agenda for possible action is discussion to adopt the Douglas County Vacation Home Rental Advisory Board bylaws. Ms. Davidson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the Advisory Board, a copy of the bylaws has been provided to you in your packet. At this point, I'm happy to answer any specific questions you may have on those materials, and I turn it over to the board.
Mr. Byer?
I guess my question is, are these subject to modification and discussion, or is this the policies and procedures as defined by the Board of County Commissioners?
Ms. Davidson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Byer, that is a very good question. It definitely depends. I would welcome any questions or concerns that you have, and we can talk through them as part of this process here today. There may be some specific legal requirements for us to keep some language the way that it is because it is copied and pasted from the ordinance the way it's written, but we'd be happy to walk you through those if you had questions regarding those sections. And Madam Chair, if I may, Mr. Taylor had something to add to that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Thank you. Ms. Davidson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Sam Taylor for the record, Douglas County DAs. I just wanted to point out that for the most part, the bylaws are capable of being amended by its members. So they're the bylaws that you, the members, choose to be governed by and how you conduct your business and also your affairs. It also deals with some ethical issues. It references the OML. It's a general guide on how to conduct business effectively, and for the most part, it's been put to the test. So these terms were borrowed from the Planning Commission, and
because we are somewhat unique in that we're brand new. And if I understand on page 18, page 8 of the bylaws, page 18 of the book, the way agendas are prepared is that any one of us, I guess, fills out a form, signing the appropriate board committee agenda form, and I just see it potentially having 60, 50, 40 agenda items immediate, and then someone is going to have to make a decision on the prioritization of that. And I guess I was looking for really input from the staff. Does this work? Do you see this working this simply, that we each submit 10 or 15 agenda items and hopefully 10 are the same? But even if there's 5 agenda items, you're going to have 25 or 30 unique agenda items from this group, and someone's going to decide what to put on the agenda. And the way this reads, it has to put on the agenda, and there's just a simple decision by the chairwoman of when to put it on the agenda, because the way it reads, it's almost like it's on the agenda for the next meeting, and that just seems strange, and it just seems very difficult to work through this for a committee that has our topic and is a brand new committee.
Thank you, Mr. Byer. Ms. Davidson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can see how that section of the bylaws could be a bit confusing, and thank you for bringing that to our attention. We'd be happy to add some clarifying language. Let me state for the record what the intent of that section of the bylaws is. That is intended for any member of this board to be able to bring forward a proposed agenda item. Obviously, based on the training you just received, some of those items are going to require a little bit of massaging before they're ripe, so to speak, to bring forward. However, that information, once submitted to staff, and I'd recommend that the members of this board submit through staff so that we can work on exactly what it is that you would like to see be discussed at the meeting, so that we can make sure that we draft a clear and concise agenda item. And also that we can provide all of the relevant background materials, because perhaps there's some data that needs to be collected relevant to your decision to determine the timing in which that item would be brought forward. Once we have developed the agenda item to a point where we think it's ready to go, certainly we would involve the chairperson in the discussion of the setting of the agenda. They do not have the ability to deny an agenda item coming forward forever, but certainly they do help decide and help us conduct business in an orderly fashion. That may mean that we, through staff, have a back and forth conversation about potentially delaying an item to a future date because we have maybe too much on one agenda versus another. There's no absolute requirement that once we receive something that it has to be set in the way that we received it at the next available meeting. And certainly we can add some clarifying language to that section if you would like. And I would use the basis of the explanation I just provided here as the basis for adopting that language. Mr. Taylor, do you have anything to add?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
Okay. Yeah, Sam Taylor again, Douglas County DAs. I would just like to note for the record that essentially this board only has the authority to act on those items which the board, county commissioners, has given it jurisdiction over. Tier 3 appeals or SUPs, special use permits, VHR appeals, and also modifications, proposed modifications to 2622 of the Douglas County Code. So if you can technically have an agenda item that does not fit within that area. However, I would note that any vote taken on such agenda item has no force or effect because you're outside the jurisdiction and scope of authority of this particular board. So, there you go.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Does anyone else have some questions? We need public comment? Public comment on the bylaws? Seeing no public comment in the chambers, is there any public comment on Zoom? Or is that what it is? Is there anyone out there?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Marsha Johnson for the record. I do have one attendee. If you would like to provide public comment on item number 4, please raise your hand now. No response, no public comment at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Do I have a motion? Mr. Sloan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Michael Sloan, I would like to make a motion that the bylaws, adopt the Douglas County Vacation Home Rental Advisory Board bylaws as written in our presentation, and that's it.
And is there a second?
I second.
Is there any more discussion? Ms. Romaine?
So just clarifying question, you're changing some of the wording because of what was just brought up, or no? I thought you were saying that I thought they were talking about the fact that because of that, we're going to look at more at this agenda procedure.
I believe we are going to pass this as written, and as we proceed down the road, we can make changes if we feel they're necessary.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I have a motion from Mr. Sloan. I have a second from Mr. Byer. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We have a unanimous vote. Item number 5, not for possible action. Brief presentation by county staff regarding the process to conduct a public hearing of the Douglas County Vacation Home Rental Advisory Board to consider an appeal by a property owner of enforcement actions taken by Douglas County Code Enforcement related to vacation home renting in Douglas County. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sam Taylor again for the record, Douglas County DAs. My job has been made much easier now to explain what the process is, because the process for how appeals are to be handled are contained within Section 6.2 of the bylaws. Essentially, what is the process that is currently in the bylaws, and again, this process can be amended should the board choose to do so or come up with a different sort of methodology that it finds appropriate. But currently, the chairman is required to read the item into the agenda publicly, and then staff will introduce the item and provide a report, if any. So in the case of these 2 pending appeals, what will happen is Mr. Dallaire, I believe, will be given an opportunity to present what happened in a particular case with the 2 appellants, and provide maybe some background information that they believe are helpful to you in rendering a decision. Why was the fine levied? What happened, when, where, how, that sort of thing. And then subsequent to that, the appellant will have an opportunity to respond to that particular item and provide their point of view, why they filed an appeal, what's the basis for the appeal, and why they feel whatever happened was unfair or shouldn't have happened. I will note that there is an opportunity for the chair to grant an opportunity for the board members to ask questions. In addition, if Mr. Delaire, say for example, something's brought up by the appellant, Mr. Delaire says, hey, whoa, wait, I want to respond to that. The chair can grant that opportunity to Mr. Delaire, and then subsequent to that, the appellant can say, hey, whoa, I disagree with what he just said, and provide another opportunity, to respond. I mean, at some point in time, you do have to cut off the sort of debate, and again, that's up to the chair to determine when that's appropriate. And then I'll also notice that once the appellant has provided their sort of testimony, then the board will have the opportunity to discuss the issue, ask questions. And by the way, the board can, conceivably, board members can ask questions during the presentation of either the appellant or staff. So, this is your opportunity to draw from both parties here the facts you feel are appropriate or necessary to make an informed decision. So if you're unsure about something, you can ask them to clarify while it is happening, while the statement is being made, immediately after the statement. Obviously, the board members normally would ask the chair for permission to ask the question, but the chair can just say, look, I'll just allow you to ask questions, and then you can just ask questions. So it's how the chair decides the meeting is to be conducted. Excuse me. I've found that over time, these things kind of have a way of working themselves out. The chair figures out how they want to do it, and the other members of the board figure out how they want to ask questions and what they need to know, when and how. And then I'll note that, again, public comment needs to be taken before you take any action. So the public is going to have an opportunity to weigh in on the topic, including appeals, including special use permits, and proposed changes to, 2622. So that's generally how these matters are to be processed and handled. And if you have any questions, I'm available to answer them now on the process.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Does anyone have any questions at this time? Mr. Byer?
Sorry, I'm always the one that asks questions, but I guess my question is to you. There seems to be some leeway here. We're going to hear appeals today, so before we do, it would be good to know your expectations. When the county presents their case, if we have questions about their case, do we ask them at the end of the presentation before the appellate? Do we wait for the appellate? Or so do you kind of have a vision of how you want to do this today before we kind of find a way through this as we work through as a committee?
Thank you, Mr. Byer. I do have a vision. I think our presentation from the county probably can be interrupted if somebody has a question relevant to the matter at hand. Otherwise, let's hold all our questions till the end of their presentation. And then I think at that point we should hear from the appellant and then discuss that. And then we can have public comment. Does that sound like the correct order? Yes. Mr. Taylor?
Yes, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I did have a couple more points that I think are germane to the subject. And the first is the burden of proof is upon the appellant. That is the party requesting the relief in this case. In other words, they are the ones who have filed the appeal. There isn't a specific burden of proof that is set forth in the bylaws, so it's a preponderance. In other words, 50 plus 1. If you find on balance that the appellant has made their case, okay, they win. If you find that staff has made their case, they win. In addition, the time limits and the number of speakers determined by the chair. So depending on the complexity of the matter, you know, not all cases are the same. Some are very cut and dried, very simple. Some are not so simple. So the chair has the ability to determine how long and who is to speak on behalf of each party, respective parties. So although I will note that the county has presented Mr. Delaire, I think, to speak on their behalf, and I'm sure the appellants will determine on their behalf who they want to have speak as well. And they can be represented by counsel. So this is not something where they couldn't bring a lawyer to speak on their behalf. At the end of the day, somebody needs to make a motion in order for, the act to be considered. So if you want to approve the appellant's position, you would move to approve the appeal, and you can modify the appeal. You can change, like, say, for example, if somebody got fined $5,000 for unpermitted VHR activity. If you found that that amount is a little excessive, you can modify that. You basically grant the appeal, deny the appeal, or modify the appeal is how it works. So whenever you're making the motion, it'd be helpful if you could put that in your motion, what you're intending to do, and exactly if you're going to amend or modify the amount of the fine, put in the dollar amount that you're intending to have replace it. In addition, whenever you're voting, you have to have basically a sufficient number to take action. So you have to have an affirmative action. So if you have a negative vote, there may need to be the opportunity to have a positive action occur. So in other words, I'll explain when we get to that point. Actually, I'm a little premature to do that now. Let's just wait until we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. I am going to try to muddle through this, but rely on both you, Ms. Davidson, and Mr. Taylor for some assistance through this first one. Ms. Graff?
Hi. Patty Graff. Thank you, Ms. Chairman, if I could call you that. I was wondering if maybe we could take a short break sometime before we hear the appellates, if that would be appropriate.
Does everybody want a 10-minute break or something like that? Okay, before we take a break, we need to conclude the current item we're on, and Mr. Byer has a question.
And so I've acted as a mediator before, and in mediators, they tell you don't give the reasons behind your decision, state your decision. As we decide these cases and as we discuss, should we be describing the reasons we grant an appeal or don't grant an appeal? Does that create precedent for future appeals? Or should we once we get our discussion, it's a yes or a no, or should we provide background as to the reason we're voting the way we vote?
That's a great question, Mr. Byer, and I will let Mr. Taylor answer it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Taylor, again, for the record, for Douglas County DAs. Just to let you know, it's good to make a record. You should put on the record what is the basis for your decision. If you're going to vote no, you should indicate why you're voting no. If you're going to vote yes, you should indicate why you're voting yes. Often boards tend, if you want to rely on what the staff has submitted, they will often just say, I move to approve X based upon what's contained within the staff report, something to that effect, or the staff recommendation. And if you're going to vote no, you should explain why you're voting no as well. Creating the record is sort of a touchy subject. If you go too far and you show a little bit of personal bias, that could work against the board, in making the decision. But overall, it's a collective body, collective decision. So as long as your board or your decisions have a rational basis for them, In other words, it's not just crazy made up, gee, I think because these people are from Mars, I'm going to vote against them. Well, that's maybe not so rational. But if you say, no, staff made a pretty good presentation and I agree with staff, yeah, I'm going to vote with staff. Or, no, I think the appellant made a great argument and I think, this point in particular really swayed me, then that's why I'm going to vote, in favor of the appellant. So.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Are there any more questions on this item? Seeing no more questions, we will take a short break. It is 2:29-ish. We'll be back in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
Okay, I'm going to call the meeting back to order. Before we get started with agenda item number 6, Mr. Taylor has a few more comments to make.
Yep, I'm sorry. Sam Taylor again for the record, Douglas County DAs. There's one quick thing I wanted to point out that does apply to your decision-making process relative to, well, just making decisions in general, and that is NRS Chapter 281A, and that is the ethics rules governing members of boards and commissions. Because this particular body does render decisions on special use permits, and because you do handle appeals and make final determinations on those, you're subject to NRS 281A. And I would just, it's not something that you should ignore because there are very stiff penalties, stiffer than OML violations, the intentional OML violations that Mr. Ritchie went over. It's relatively important. I mean, it's mainly conflicts of interest, when you should recuse yourself, when you shouldn't, those sorts of things. Annually, there is training given, and I think it's available online. I think we have it recorded that you can get with Jennifer or somebody in the county staff and review that training that's conducted by the Nevada Ethics Commission. And it's very good. It's pretty comprehensive, goes over everything, and you should really make yourself aware of that. So, for example, if you are rendering a decision about a VHR in a building that you occupy or an area that you live in, and maybe they're adjacent to you, you should be cognizant of that. And, you know, it's up to each individual board member to determine when they should recuse. And on certain instances, you must, if you're not going to recuse, but it might be viewed as a conflict, you might need to go on the record and state, you know, here's the facts, here's what's happening, but I don't think it's going to be a conflict because. That happens all the time at the Planning Commission. I think more so at the Planning Commission than the board, but happens all the time. So, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. We will move on to item number 6 for possible action, public hearing and discussion on an appeal contesting the $5,000 fine and penalties issued in code enforcement case number 21-0282 for Jen Hardcastle and James Larson related to the operation of a vacation home rental without a valid Douglas County issued VHR permit at 761 Milky Way, Unit 3, State Line, Nevada, APN 1318-30-615-003. Mr. Dallaire.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the rest of the committee members, this is Tom Dallaire, Community Development Director for the record. We're here today to discuss Ms. Hardcastle and Mr. Larson's VHR permit. The permit has expired on October 31st of 2020. Douglas County policy and code states that we don't, or it doesn't state that, but it doesn't necessarily mean we have to notify the permit holders when the permits expire, and we didn't notify them when the permit expired, but the permit did expire. Hardcastle and Larson continued to rent the unit through March 2021, and And at that time, they ceased the rentals. They rented it 10 times between the time their permit expired and when they stopped renting the permit. And I just wanted to make sure that was documented. You were able to see that in the staff report and the documentation provided, that it was 10 times. I can go by each month if you'd like, but it was. That's the issue with the fine. There was some. We were notified by HDL in August of 2021 that after Ms. Hardcastle and Mr. Larson had applied for the VHR permit, that's when we requested the background on that particular rental. And HDL, who utilizes host compliance, was able to find that they had, and was able to confirm that they had rented those 10 times prior to them submitting the permit in March. I also want to remind this board that our county commission on February 18th had suspended our permits, suspended issuing VHR permits on February 18th, and we as staff were not allowed to issue any permits any new permits after that time frame. So until the new code was adopted, which was July 15th. So that's the situation with this particular case. We sent a notice and order on August 27th. So after the Hardcastles had applied for the VHR list, the VHR application process for the wait list starts in July 1st, goes through the end of July, and we were going down the list and had requested HDL do that background of each applicant to see if they were renting or not renting for their status on the actual wait list. And that's when we found that that the Hardcastles, Ms. Hardcastle and Mr. Larson had been renting. So they are current on their TOTs, and Mr. Larson and Ms. Hardcastle have filed their appeal on September 7th, which is within the time frame of the enforcement and notice that went out, or the notice and order that went out. So I would like to turn it over to them. I know they're on Zoom, so that they can print their or present their case, and I'm available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Dallaire. Does anyone have any questions for him before we hear from the appellant?
Madam Chair, if I may, Michael Sloan for the record. Yes, sir. I do have a question of staff. You mentioned that there was no notification to the applicant here that their permit had been expired. I know it's not our responsibility to notify them, but I, as a permit holder, get emails saying, hey, your permit's going to expire in 60 days. So why wasn't one sent out to this applicant?
It was actually sent out, if you look at the packet, on August 31st of 2021, so a couple months prior to their permit expiring in October of August 30th of 2020. And so that was something that HDL actually did do. It's in Exhibit 6.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Sloan?
Thank you. Yes, it does.
Thank you, Mr. Dallaire. Anybody else have a question for Mr. Dallaire before we go to the appellant? Okay. Ms. Hardcastle, I believe you're available to speak with us. We're not hearing you. Hang on a second.
Okay, is that better? Okay. Thank you for that brief summary, and I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to come in front of you. I feel like special since it's the first meeting, your first meeting ever forming, and I'm the first appellant to come before you. So yeah, we're here. It's been a long road to get here. What wasn't mentioned in the presentation is that we have been a permit holder for quite some time and have been in good standing with Douglas County. I think this would have been our second cycle of renewal of our permit. We pay our TOT taxes on time. In the time that we've been renting our property, we have never had a noise complaint, any complaints about garbage. You get the idea that we're responsible hosts and responsible not only to our guests, but to Douglas County. I assume that everyone got the packet, and my letter, our letter to Douglas County is dated September 2nd. And I don't want to go through everything if you've already read this, but I do want to highlight a couple things. One is that we've been a permit holder for another time. During the time that one email notification came, and I want to emphasize one email notification came that our permit was expiring, we were in the process of remodeling our new home. We were in the process of experiencing COVID, and we were in the process of potential evacuations because of threat to our primary home. So we live in Sonoma County, and as you know, Sonoma County has had its share of natural disasters over the last couple of years. So basically, our life was 100% chaos during this time. And I received one email that I didn't see. I didn't see it, the date went past, and I certainly own that it is the permit holder's responsibility, but I do believe that there's a shared responsibility here. One email came and flew by in the midst of believing our own primary home could be burning and that we would have to evacuate. And in that same time period, between that notification, which I never saw, and several months later, I received several emails from Douglas County referring to me as a permit holder. Those emails came reminding me to file my TOT tax. Those emails came addressed to a permit holder saying that, you know, COVID-19 was here and real, and here's what's going on in Douglas County, and here's what the health officer recommends. And so I'm going to say I received no fewer than 10 to 15 emails from Douglas County referring to me as a permit holder that came after that one email reminding me. So I own the responsibility for reapplying. I get that. I was successful at one other time in my life. It was just chaotic. And in the absence of an additional potential reminder and the presence of multiple emails addressing me as a permit holder, it just didn't even occur to me that we had gone beyond the time. In the presentation, he mentioned that we had 10 events, 10 renting events. I forget exactly, sir, how you relayed how many times people occupied our property after the permit had expired. But it was 5 stays. It was 5 individual stays. And all of those stays were during a time that I was not aware that our permit had lapsed. One of the stays was after I was aware, and it was after I had resubmitted the application for a new permit. We also got caught in the web of the new regulations, the task force, developing and all of that. So I just want to point out that 4 of those stays, I was completely unaware that we were operating outside of the rules and regulations of Douglas County. The one stay that I did allow, of course, I regret that now. I was talked into it by the guest, and I naively assumed that because I had my application on file that it would be okay, but it was well after my application was on file. We're not people to fly in the face of regulations and ignore the rules that apply to us. I think this was simply a case of just being overwhelmed with life circumstance and overlooking our responsibility to renew our permit. That and then the presence of all the emails telling me I was a permit holder. I think what we're asking for today, I think also it's important for you to understand, and it's in your permit in your packet. As soon as I became aware that our permit had lapsed, I removed the Douglas County number from our listing on VRBO, and I blocked out our condo for 6 months, believing that this would all resolve within 6 months. You all have been involved in it. You know intimately that it's taken much more time than that to get to where you are now with the ordinance published. But I blocked it for 6 months. And then also in your packet, you'll see that I did have inquiries beyond when it was blocked. And my response to those inquiries was that I was apologetic, but we were in the process of renewing our permit with Douglas County, and we simply could not make our property available. And at that point, I extended the blocks well beyond. I don't even know how far out they go now. I think it's possibly up to a year until we could get through the process with you and navigate to a good solution. So I hope you will consider all of this. What we are basically asking for is relief, full relief from the $5,000 fee. It is creating a hardship for us on top of COVID impacting reservations. Now we have blocked our condo since last March. So we're coming up on however many months that is now. I guess about 7 months of blocking. And so in addition to the amount of the fee, I just don't believe it's commensurate to the condition here. We're trying to do things right. And as soon as it was brought to our attention that we weren't doing things right, we tried to do it right. We took the steps to make it right. The other thing is that along with the fine is the potential to never being offered the opportunity to hold a vacation rental permit ever again. And again, I just ask you to look at the history here, look at the circumstances, and understand that I don't think that that's appropriate in this case. So I will acknowledge that I knowingly rented our place one time in March, believing that having my permit on file, my application in would be a buffer to that. So I acknowledge that, but the previous ones were unknowingly operating without a permit. And I ask you to consider one email in the lives of busy, very busy people. Is that enough? If they're auto-generated from an algorithm out of a computer, couldn't there be a couple? PG&E notifies you, any service, your car insurance, if you overlook something, they let you know. And I think that that's something that this committee should look at so that people like myself who are generally responsible and have their lives together don't find themselves in this situation. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hardcastle. Does anyone on the board here have questions directly for the appellant? Mr. Byer?
So I'm just trying to reconcile the two, because you mentioned four, if I remember right, you either rented 4 times after 4 or 5, and then one, there was an acknowledgement that you did rent after you knew your permit had expired. On page 156 of our package,
156?
Packet page 156. It says
mine are not numbered.
Maybe it's page 7 of yours. It is on the, I don't know if you had the same package we have with the exhibits, but on the last page of this section, there's an agenda action sheet, and it says vacation home rental 41 times without a permit. And so can you reconcile
Byer,
4 and 41?
Mr. Byer, I think you're looking at the
am I the wrong one?
second
Sorry.
matter.
Sorry.
So can I clarify the events? So the presenter said that there were 10 rentals. Those rentals were 10 nights. It was 5 different stays. 4 of those stays were before I was aware that our permit has expired. And the one was a weak moment on my part in March after I had filed the permit application.
Ms. Hardcastle, I think we're pretty clear on the dates. We have all the backup and your information is helpful.
Okay.
Ms. Romaine?
I just forgot my first question. Oh, you did say when you first started your presentation that you'd only gone through the process twice, but you've had a permit since 2014. So shouldn't you have gone through the process about?
So,
No?
no, we bought this condo for our own use. I'm a big time skier and hiker. And we did not even consider renting it when we first bought it. One, we remodeled the entire inside, which took us a lengthy time to do. And two, it just wasn't on our horizon that we would rent it. We then got busy building our own business. We are in an aviation business that we started 2 years ago. And we weren't using the condos so much. So it was at that point that we decided to go ahead and rent it enough to offset our costs. So our goals in renting is to offset basically our $12,000 of operating costs, Douglas County taxes and Wi-Fi and TV and all of that.
Okay. And then just another quick, I see that a lot of times addresses on VHRs are not correct, and on the advertisement it does say Glenbrook. Why is there a Glenbrook address versus State Line in the paperwork?
VRBO automatically generated that based on the address I put in, and I don't understand it.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know where Glenbrook is.
Does anybody else have any questions for the appellant, Mr. Sloan?
Madam Chairman, or Ms. Chairman, for staff. So just to clarify, the 10 times were 10 days, not 10 different rentals, as she mentioned. It was 5 different rentals, or do you have that ability to look in and see if they're days or rentals or what they are? Thank you.
Thank you, Member Sloan. On page 123 and 124 of your packet, you can see what we get from, this is a host compliance report, and host searches the databases of vacation home rentals, and basically it just shows that they have a documented stay. And that's all the evidence that we get. I think the documented stay in that particular program probably stems from a response, possibly from somebody who stayed at the house and rented the home, and that's how they really document it. If you look at the new code under, let me see if I wrote the reference down, it was 6C, I want to say, we are now just doing advertising. If you advertise here rental, then the $5,000 fine now, not just renting, because we have a hard time finding out exactly when they rented. Also, another proof is the TOT payments as well.
Thank you, but she is current on TOT at this time?
Yes, I believe so. Mm-hmm. She hasn't rented that we can tell since March.
No, I haven't. It's been blocked and it remains blocked. And as far as that goes, I have maintained the VRBO website page, just not wanting to take it down and have to recreate it. So I blocked those those dates, those months off. It's still blocked. And as evidence of my commitment not to operate without a permit, as you can see, I did have a couple of inquiries. I think there's 3 or 4 examples where someone was thinking about Christmas already, and it was, early in the year. And so I said, oh gosh, I need to block it out that far. And no, I cannot rent the place. I'm in the permit process.
Thank you, Ms. Hardcastle. Any more questions from the board for Ms. Hardcastle? I have a question for you, Mr. Dallaire. Is this her first permit they ever had?
That's a good question. I believe if you look at the permit itself that we applied or that we provided, I could not find the actual permit from the year prior, but I believe she had a permit 1 year prior to this. This permit was actually issued on December. Where was it at? There was I'm sorry, I had my thumb on that permit. It was issued on December 26th of 2019, but it expires on October 31st of 2020. So it just tells me that she was late last year as well. And as you recall, we discussed this earlier, that the staff at the time was way more lenient on applicants in renewing their applications back then, and we've been trying to go by the code, especially now with the cap.
Thank you, Mr. Dallaire. I did have a note to myself that it looked like a previous renewal was not timely, maybe a couple minutes or a couple months delayed, but I wasn't sure until you. One other comment I just want to make.
Can I add? Our previous, this one. Never mind. I was looking for our previous permit for the dates. Sorry to interrupt.
One other comment I wanted to make is that it's been made clear on all the documentation that permit holders have that it is up to them to keep track of when their permit is due for renewal. And just a reminder, in the ordinance, it's very clear that renting your home is a privilege, not a right. And I think that's an important thing for everybody to keep in mind. That said, does anyone else have any comments to make or any more questions?
I do, if I could.
Ms. Romaine?
I think it's for Mr. Dallaire. So she's mentioning a possible ban on not being able to get permits in the future. Is that something that goes along with a fine like this and it's automatic, or is that something that is separate?
Thank you, Ms. Romaine. Yeah, it is in here. So on packet page 86, under the timeline and explanation, they did file for both Ms. Hardcastle and Mr. Larson filed for the to be on the VHR wait list. That's what triggered the investigation into the property. And when they signed that application, there are 3 lines there that I copied into the staff report showing 16, 17, and 18 are the lines of the application that they're certifying that they, by signing this application, the owner attests that they have read Douglas County's VHR ordinance 622. They applied after the ordinance was in effect. That was on the 27th. The ordinance went into effect on July 15th. And then failure of the applicant to comply with any of the provisions, 622, Douglas County may disqualify them from being placed on the wait list. And that's where that is coming from. And it is in code as well, identified in code under Title 2622. And we've got about 145 people we had 145 people on the wait list, and if people were renting while they were on the wait list, then we were disqualifying. This is, I think, up to you guys to decide if you want them on the wait list. They can remain. She didn't actually rent after the wait list, but we had sent out a few other letters to folks on the wait list, and we were treating them all the same.
Thank you, Mr. Dallaire. Did that answer your question, Ms. Romaine?
Yes.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions?
I don't have any questions, Madam Chair, but at what point would it be appropriate to make a motion or possibly an amendment? What time would that be appropriate?
I believe I need to ask for public comment first.
Thank you.
And if everybody is good with that, I will ask for a public comment. Ms. Waller, can you just give me 1 second? Ms. Romaine has one more thing to say.
So I apologize. Lauren Romaine. Mr. Dallaire, this is new, and like you're saying before, things were different before this ordinance changed, before the task force, before we realized there were issues and things that needed to be addressed. The Board of County Commissioners has taken some of these up, I believe. is in your, the cases were basically kind of the same thing, correct? They were same type of thing, no permit, had rented, had permits before, but either expired or whatever, correct? And the board is upholding those fines and the suggestions of what is happening. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. The prior code had the $5,000 fine in there, and we have started implementing that civil penalty on folks who are renting, not only ones that have had a permit, but specifically ones that haven't. That's what we've been really focusing on, but there are others that haven't, and we have been applying those rules as well, and I think per code, rightfully so. You can't really operate, you can't operate without a permit in Douglas County, and that's the part that we're trying to enforce. Unfortunately, we are not responsible to allow them to or to let them know that their permit is expired, but it is something we are working on to try and provide some better customer service, and we will get there. But with all the changes, going on between my department and working with HDL, we are working through a lot of issues right now, and hopefully we'll have this kind of wrapped up by hopefully in the next month or two.
Thank you, Mr. Dallaire. If there's no other... Well, I was going for public comment. Thank you for your patience.
Ellie Waller for the record. I want to thank staff, Jen for her due diligence in the process to get where we are today, Tom, Mr. Taylor, the fire department's here. I'd like to also thank law enforcement, code enforcement for getting us here today so you can represent the county on behalf of the appeals that are going on. We appreciate your service here today. No callousness intended, but this project and process has been going on for years, and the public has participated. Anybody that owns a rental of any merit could have participated for the last 2 years, so they knew that the rules were coming forward. I'm proud to say they're stringent. They're the most stringent in the basin that I've been able to find. I've been participating in Washoe and Placer County processes as well. I don't know that this really is qualified as a hardship. It's an investment choice. It's not an entitlement as it's been stated. And I agree with the staff assessment. Mr. DeBlair brought up that the 3 items happen to be actually mentioned in the staff reports. And I would be curious, how and when does the VHR owner get notified that this will be banned and should be banned? Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have any other public comment? Is there any public comment from the Zoom?
I'm not considered public, right?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Marcia Johnson for the record. I do have 2 people who are attending. I have 1 caller that I will check with now. Caller, do you have public comment on item number 6? Natalie?
Hello, my name is Natalie Yanish. I'm a resident of Kingsbury Grade on Andrea Drive. I have more of a question. Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Can the board hear Natalie?
Am I coming through?
Okay, go ahead, Natalie.
We aren't hearing anything here.
Yeah, we're having, I'm trying to unmute her. If you can Bear with me for one moment, sorry. Okay, there we go. Natalie, if you can state your name for the record, please.
Yes, am I coming through?
Yes.
Hello? Oh, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you now.
Oh, okay, great. My apology. I keep hitting *6 and it keeps unmuting me and then telling me that I'm muted. I don't know what's going on with Zoom today. It's not my friend. My name's Natalie Yanish. I am a resident of Kingsbury Grade. I live at 425 Andrea Drive. I had more of a question, and I know that, this may or may not be able to be addressed because it is public comment, but and this would be, I guess, directed more towards Mr. Ritchie, as far as the capacity for the county to actually enact a fine on someone who is advertising a property for sale, but who actually has not rented it. And I'm not sure, I'm not an attorney, so what the legal, consequences of that might be, if that's something the county actually has the power to do. Because it seems like you might be getting into some issues with free speech or other protections, for private property owners, regardless of, whether or not, if they did rent their property without a permit, that is one scenario. But if someone advertises a property without having a permit, is that actually an enforceable fine that can be put on a property owner? So that was just more of a question, I guess, in the process. And my apology if it was brought up and I was unable to hear during the meeting because I've been having some technical difficulties. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Yanish. Is there anyone else that has called in?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Marsha Johnson for the record. At this time, I have no further public comment.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Seeing no further public comment, I will close public comment, and we will discuss it further, or if somebody wants to make a motion. Mr. Byer.
I guess I'd like to discuss before motion. I have an incredible amount of sympathy. I think all of us do. We all were just evacuated. I assume all of us were a couple weeks ago. So I have a lot of sympathy for an evacuee going through that kind of turmoil, remodeling the house. I can understand. And there is an inherent nature of a VHR permit holder. I'm not going to say it's a business, but it's not an ordinary citizen thing. And I think with that comes certain responsibilities. And I think part of that, I do believe, I want to avoid situations like this, not penalize situations like this. So I am all in favor of talking about how we notify, when we notify, do we notify when, we notified in here a couple of months before. I'm all in favor of having a conversation whether we notify that it has expired. I'm all in favor of a further conversation, but I believe there's an obligation of a VHR permit holder to understand when their permit will expire, that when they sign the application, to read the application, to understand that advertising is also a violation. There was communication, so I do understand, I would say, a good faith effort to make it inactive by blocking time, but it's also an indication that it was for advertising. And there's a benefit to advertising even if you can't rent your condo now. That's why VRBO does it that way. You have people come this year and next year and there. So there was advertising, even though there was an understanding when they signed the application. The application, there also was an admission that there was a rental after everything was said and done, when they knew there was when they knew their permit had expired, but it was, help to somebody who really needed a place to stay. But it was a clear admission that there was a rental when there's no extenuating circumstances other than a choice. I don't know. I don't want to use the word leniency, but I don't know I don't know if we want to grant exceptions based on, I didn't know my permit was expired, regardless of the circumstances. I didn't, I did a good faith effort, even though I knew that I was still advertising. So I haven't seen a reason to reject the staff's proposal to deny the appeal. But that's not an agenda item. I'd like to hear others. I mean, because these things are rarely black or white. So I'd like to hear other people's opinion.
Can I make a comment on that? Can I make a comment?
Ms. Hardcastle, please hold on.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Hardcastle, I believe we've heard most of your all of your testimony at this time. I would like to hear comments from our board members.
I would love to just say one thing, if I could, very briefly, because I think it's important as you move forward.
Ms. Hardcastle, no. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Madam Chair.
Ms. Graff?
Madam Chair, Patty Graff. Listening to all this and reading through all the paperwork, the owners have had previous permits. They're experienced with them. They realize that the permit expires in a year. They have knowledge and experience. When the email is sent out, I have a permit, I get the email sent out, that's a red flag. That's saying that there's something going on with your permit, it's getting ready to expire. A lot of things go on in life, but it wasn't a priority, it seems like, because they let it lapse. And then on the 27th, by Douglas County setting out the letter, she acknowledged, and the owners acknowledged, that they weren't to rent at all. And knowing that the permit had expired, there should not have been any advertising or rental whatsoever, no matter how many. It was her discretion that these people were, oh, it's a hardship, I need to rent this place. That was their choice to violate the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Graff. Ms. Romaine?
What a first meeting. Boy, I'll tell you. I think one of the things, and it hasn't been brought up yet, that concerns me, and some of that has to do with the fact that we live, and there's many areas in the lake that have places that are older, and one of the things that happens when you rent and you haven't had your permit done is a life safety inspection. And some of the stories that I've heard of some of the places that are being rented out or found by our fire department when they go in to inspect is amazing to me. And so it's maybe not even that, because this place had been inspected before, but I do know that every year, you need to get a recharge on your fire extinguisher, that who knows what else might have happened or changed. And to me, sometimes I guess, I'm thinking as a person who uses Airbnb also, that the oversight and the watchfulness of the people who permit these things ensures that where you're staying is actually safe, and that the minor things that you would know about if you lived there are taken care of, and that hopefully if something happened, there wouldn't be a loss of life. So one of the things I just want to bring up is it just concerns me the fact of having places that are rented that have not had the oversight in a year of the life safety inspections, which I think are so vital. So, thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Romaine. Mr. Sloan, do you have something?
Guess I'm the last one. So the way I see it, the big problem I had was renting that at least at one time, knowing she shouldn't have rented at that time. That being said, I do think she did try and make mitigating efforts to block out, even though it probably would have been better just to remove it from, is it Verbo or Airbnb, whatever it is. I just think $5,000 is excessive for her particular case, and I would be willing to either make a motion or discuss with fellow board members on maybe an amended amount. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sloan. My only comments echo what Mr. Byer and Ms. Graff said, that when you've had a permit and you're understanding what your responsibilities are, then you have to follow through with those, and life does get in the way once in a while. And overriding all that is the one stay that was allowed without a permit, knowingly without a permit. That does kind of bother me, and I think, for my purposes, I think our penalties are justified. So if somebody would like to make a motion, I would like to hear it.
Let me make a statement first, and again, I understand the $5,000. I don't know what the penalty, sometimes when you do things out of license, you just gorge all your revenues. The revenues of 10 rentals, I don't know what those are. But to me, I understand 5,000 is a lot, but I don't think we should move away. The statute says 5,000, and honestly, I don't want to get into a situation where every single case we try to decide if it's 5,000 or 4,500 or $1,776.24. I think there's some comfort I take in $5,000. So I would like to move we deny the appeal of the $5,000 fine for renting a vacation home without a permit based on the evidence submitted and the testimony presented.
Thank you, Mr. Byer. Do I have a second?
I'll second, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Graff. I've got a motion from Mr. Byer, a second from Ms. Graff. All those in favor of denying the appeal, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Opposed.
So I have 4 in favor of denying the appeal, and Mr. Sloan in a nay. Okay. The next agenda item is also...
Can I ask a follow-on question? Just real quick. I accept your decision. That's fine. Hello?
Go ahead, Ms. Hardcastle. Yes. Well,
I would just ask you, I accept your decision. I don't like it, but I accept it. My one request of this group as you move forward is, I heard it stated that you were going to be trying to improve customer service. And I do think that one email saying that your permit is expiring and 10 to 15 during the subsequent period addressing you as a permit holder needs to be addressed. I think that would be helpful for people who find themselves in a situation as me.
thank you, Ms. Hardcastle.
Mm-hmm.
Item number 7, for possible action, public hearing and discussion on an appeal contesting the $5,000 fine for penalties issued in code enforcement case number 21-0274 for Kevin Bartlett and Joan Bartlett related to the operation of a vacation home rental without a valid Douglas County issued VHR permit at 193 Meadow Lane, State Line, Nevada, APN number 1318-23-810-060. Mr. Dallaire.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tom Dallaire, Community Development Director for the record. This one's Kevin and Joan Bartlett, who are here in the audience for 193 Meadow Lane in State Line. They received a permit renewal. They filed for a permit renewal on August 15th of 2019. Let's see, which was issued on the 16th. So that was the permit that had expired in August. Sorry, my glasses are making things blurry. Sorry. So the HDL, which is our third-party permitting company, that's the long name there. I'm looking at back at page 161 for those who want to kind of follow along. We had informed them that the permit expired on January 29th, 2021. The Bartletts commenced the new application process on February 11th, which you can see, I think, in our Exhibit 6. The county commissioners suspended the issuing of new VHR permits on February 18th, 2021, and that permit didn't get processed between HDL and staff before the county commission had set that new permit. New VHR permits were no longer being issued, and we have a number of rentals since their permit had expired. Let's see, so they expired on July 31st of 2020. And we have documented stays, which again, through host compliance, 29 times through February 17th, when the application was submitted, when their application was submitted to HDL. And it's my understanding that it was a completed application. We had just talked about a few of these happening in the county, and on July 15th of 2021, we did issue their permit, backdating it to July 15th, which is when we were able to issue a new permit. The appeal and the reason we sent the fine was because the actual permit expired July 31st of 2020, and they proceeded to rent the unit out through the time that they had applied for the new permit. So I know they're here in the audience to discuss that. I don't know if you have any specific questions for me.
Mr. Dallaire, I do have a question. The letter that's in our packet from the appellant says they've been renting for 5 or 6 years, 5 years we've been operating. And I saw a list of TOT tax that went back several years. But it looks like there were 2 years where there was no permit. Was there a time when permits were for more than 1 year?
No, not that I'm aware of. I think there's a time where staff was a little more lenient on folks to renew late, and in this case, 2 years late. But I think our code enforcement officer, when she took that over, she had them go through and do back taxes. I think the per code at the time was 3 years, and they had to pay a substantial amount to TOTs. I believe that's the records that they had sent and provided in their appeal documentation.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Dallaire. Does anyone, Mr. Byer?
Mr. Dallaire, we had a package before us to review before the meeting, and on page 160, I hope I'm in the right case this time. In their statement, they said that Bill Smith told them that there was some turmoil and they could continue to rent. I noticed in the prior case that the county has something called account notes, because several times the previous appellant called, there was a note in the account notes about what was discussed. Did you and I didn't see any account notes here, and I don't know if I'm looking for the absence, when you're trying to look for the absence of something, it's hard to find. So are there any account notes which Bill Smith would have said he told them they could continue to rent? Or are you aware of any county employee, not ordering, but instructing Bill Smith to tell people they could continue to rent without a permit?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Member Byer. I'm not aware of staff telling Mr. Smith, who was an employee of HDL, and I know we dealt with him quite a bit back when we first moved to to provide their service for our permitting. Sarah Dillon was our code enforcement officer at the time who was working on this with Mr. Smith. So I don't have any documentation that otherwise we would have included it in here. I believe we did ask for that information from HDL. We do have on the permit a listing of the communications back and forth. It's generally just notes in there about the application process, but we weren't able to locate where that actually was at and if they noted it in the file. And Miss Dillon is no longer with the county. Just that's the other problem.
Thank you, Mr. Dallaire. Is there any more questions for Mr. Dallaire? Mr. Sloan?
Madam Chair, thank you so much. Yes, to follow up here, in the applicant letter that they submitted, they say, you, in quotes, you will see or hear in notes recordings for Douglas County enforcement. I don't know what that is, or maybe they'll present that upon, So,
Excuse me, Aaron, answer a couple. I can clear that up.
come up. I have them come up.
Okay. We need to finish our discussion up here first, and then we'll be calling for the appellant and for public comment. Thank you. Proceed, Mr. Sloan.
Off. Now am I on? Okay. Can you hear me now? Since we had our open meeting policy instructions, I do want to make the board aware that this home is actually on the street I live on. However, I do not know the applicants at all and have never had any meeting or conversations with them.
Thank you for that information. Mr. Taylor, do you see any issues with that?
Sam Taylor, Douglas County DA for the record. No, I don't. I think the disclosure was fair. One thing, whenever you're making such a disclosure, normally what you would do is indicate whether or not that particular fact which you disclosed would have any effect or bearing on your decision-making process.
And it won't have any bearing on my decision-making process.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Thank you, Mr. Sloan. At this time, if there's no more questions for Mr. Dallaire, I'd like to go to, is the appellant's here? I'd like to hear from them.
Okay, so okay to talk now?
State your name for the record.
I'm Joan Bartlett.
Kevin Bartlett, as you already know.
Okay. So I'm just going to read my letter. Is that okay for the record? Okay. So, to the Honorable VHR Advisory Board, this letter is to appeal the notice in order This is to appeal the notice and order assessment of civil penalty under codes 20.691.270 and 20.691.280. Operation of a VHR without a permit. We are Kevin and Joan Bartlett and the owners of 193 Meadow Lane in State Line, Nevada. We've been operating a vacation rental home for approximately 5 years, receiving a permit in July of 2016. We currently hold a valid permit number 08401979. Our original vacation rental home permit number 08400369 expired July of 2020, and we did not receive any notification via email or any other mail during that time period, and then received an email stating that our VHR permit had expired. When we were finally notified via email 6 months later on Friday, January 29th, 2021, that the permit had expired, we immediately went to work to get everything in for our application to have it renewed as quickly as we could. Unfortunately, we had just put our application in the day before it was shut down to decide on the new legislation, and we were placed in a limbo status. And that actually was, according to Bill Smith. I was in contact with him right away. Very nice man, super helpful, very easy to talk to. When we inquired on January 29th, 2021 about our new permit with Douglas County Tax Specialist Bill Smith, he told us that it should be remedied soon and we could still continue to rent during the limbo because we originally had a permit and the new one was pending. And then my husband, where it says, there's in parentheses, you will see it here in notes and recordings for Douglas County Code Enforcement, we were under the understanding that every time we talked to them that it was being recorded. We don't know that for sure, but that's what we were hoping for.
Yeah, the county phones, we figure that they're recorded because a lot of agencies do that. We do where I'm from, so.
We were issued a new permit on July 16th, 2021 and have been abiding by the new rules. We talked to Donna Arts from Code Enforcement Office. There were no record or evidence of the county's records that an email or bill was sent notifying us earlier that the permit was about to expire as well. And I forgot to put in my letter that when I spoke to Bill Smith, he realized that there was a mistake in our email address and that we never received that notice. And that was something I made a note to myself to add to this letter. Although there's a small window of technical violation of letting the original permit expire, there was never any intent to defraud or skirt the system. And of course, we continue to pay our transient occupancy tax the whole time. Additionally, 2021 was an extremely hard year with COVID issues, which could have affected the county workers, possibly working from home, and maybe that is why we did not get a notice. And then I realized there was a switching of, hands between the code enforcement and this new HDL company that took over. So maybe there was a little lapse in, that time frame. We would like you to know that since we became Airbnb owners, we have strived to be the best we can be to our neighbors because we know this can put a strain on the neighborhoods. We pay our bills on time and have always paid our TOT. I am adding an attachment to this package to show you just how much we have paid over the years and always on time, $42,000 and some change to be exact. I think we're a great asset to this county. Every previous year we would receive a bill from Douglas County notifying us the permit fee was due. Obviously last year we did not get that. We feel that not letting us know till many months later that the permit expired because the bill was not paid is setting up people to fail. Most would have to agree that this is not good business practice and is outside the industry our industry standard. We feel this is an unjust decision because every bill we pay generally comes with an invoice and or a statement to remind us that our bill is coming due, especially since we had previously been receiving a bill. And you'll notice there's a thing that was sent, and it shows where we were billed previously in 2019 for the VHR permit. And we weren't billed in 2020, and that shows on that listing. I'll explain later. But since the original permit did expire and we did not get notification of it for a few months and we were in technical violation at that time, we would ask that the review board would show us mercy and empathy in this case and find it in our favor of dismissing the case. We feel that during a normal year, we would have been notified sooner that our permit was going to expire, and we feel that our relationship with Douglas County is symbiotic and very good for both parties to positively move forward. Please let us know if we can provide any additional information. And then I had a couple notes. There was another woman in the commissioners meeting on June 17th. Her case was very similar to our case, Susan Van Dorn. And Susan explained exactly what I explained. She said she spoke to Bill Smith and he said it was okay to keep moving forward. And I have on here her case number and where you can look at in the Board of County Commissioners meeting. You look at 3.48.28 in that meeting, and you will hear her say, Bill Smith said it was okay for her to keep moving forward, like he told me as well. And I thought, I knew, that it was okay. And so, again, I just say that we are not willfully flaunting the rules. And shouldn't the crime or the punishment fit the crime? We are law-abiding citizens. My husband is a retired law enforcement officer, lieutenant in his police department. We do not break the rules, and we follow the laws. And I think everything put before you will show that we pay our bills. We would have paid this bill, and I just don't think that the $5,000 is fair. And one other thing is, we get notices every single month now that HDL took over. We get a note that says, your TOT is due. I pay it. Then they say, oh, your TOT has been received. I noticed that. Then they say, oh, your TOT has been accepted. They send us 3 notifications that we have gotten or received, that we're being billed for this TOT. Why don't they do that with the permit? And then the other thing, I agree with the woman that spoke before me. I think that they should send out a letter saying, your permit is due. If they're going to go to that extent to say that your TOTs are due, why wouldn't they go to that extent to say, for the permitting process? So, anyways, and my husband wanted to say a couple of notes too.
Just briefly, we just ask that the board put yourselves in our position. We're trying to do everything we can correctly. And we did what we were told to do. So when we found out the permit had expired, we went and we got a new one, immediately applied, and we're told to keep renting. This is by a representative of the county, so we assume he's got authority to tell us to rent. And then we get a permit, which we currently hold. And we did nothing that the county didn't tell us to do, or someone in authority. So again, we follow the rules. And if you guys, or if someone would have said stop, we would have stopped immediately. It's as simple as that. For Ms. Hardcastle from earlier, we got caught up like she did and numerous other people in the HDL transition. Plain and simple. That's when they're transitioning. I thought it might be COVID related because I didn't know the inside story until listening to Tom Delaire talk earlier. And we got caught up in how things were transitioning to the billing from the old system to the new system. And that's what I perceive as the delay. And we got caught up in it. Unfortunately, I feel extremely sad for Ms. Hardcastle. I mean, I just saying out there, she works hard and she's an honest person. And she didn't, I don't, it's hard to say all or nothing, right? The board has the ability to make a different fine amounts. And I understand your point. You don't want to say that was worth $5,000 and this is worth $2,000 off and whatever. I get that. I completely understand. But at the end of the day, the punishment should fit the crime, right? And if you don't get punched in the face for something that deserves a slap on the wrist. We, again, humbly request that you consider what we've put forward and put yourself in our position and ask for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Bartlett. At this time, I want to ask if the board has any specific questions for the appellants. Mr. Byer?
You should just always assume. And I don't necessarily want to get into a debate about the crime, the punishment fitting the crime, but you mentioned, you get paid, and again, it's admirable, you've contributed a lot to the county. In February, March, April, May, June, and I understand that you believe you were relying on, Bill Smith's advice. But what were your revenues during that period? Your revenues during February, March, April, May, and June, when you knew you did not have a permit, but you were renting based on, in your claim that you're based on his representation. I was trying to look at your TOT is 6,146, and I don't know what TOT is about 14% or something like that.
14
plus 5, so it kind of throws out. But you earned about over $40,000 of rental income during that period. Is that correct? Or does that sound right?
Well, you're saying that we knowingly rented without having a permit?
Didn't you apply in January, February for a permit?
Whatever the 14%, if you did the math correctly, then that would be
okay. So your rental during the period post the time you filed a permit, stating that stating these things, that you were aware of the code, you're aware of the provisions of the code, you were aware that understand advertising a VHR without a permit will result in a $20,000 fine. You were aware of those, right? You signed that application.
We had an application pending, so I'm not sure.
Would you have not signed that application in February?
Maybe Mr. Gelaire knows.
On the wait list application, is that the one you're talking about, in July of 2021?
Yes.
They did, they applied, let's see, continue to rent it. They signed the wait list application, I believe, on July 15th, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I'm reading my notes here wrong.
July 15th of 2021.
The wait list. For the wait list application, and on that is this, the same statements that I read last time, the 16, 17, and 18.
But when they did their application in January, we would expect them to know what the law says, that you can't advertise or rent, but did they sign anything that said they did?
I am not sure what HDL had on the application. I don't have that in front of me. I can find out, but I don't have that in. Actually, I didn't download that part.
And again, we were going on what Bill Smith had told us. He said, we're in limbo right now. I'm going to the meetings. Call me back in a week. I mean, we had several phone calls back and forth with Bill Smith because I was very concerned, and he said, do not worry about it. I didn't even know HDL was a thing. I thought it was Bill Smith, I thought it's just this little, tiny little town. You've got one person running the whole deal. I didn't know, so Bill Smith was my guy. I was like, he said, don't worry about it. You can keep renting. You've got your permit in. You were a previous permit holder. I really had to go on what Mr. Smith had told me.
Can I just stop you for a minute?
Yes,
and I apologize for the interruption.
Yeah.
But we need to take a quick recess because there's some information that I need to get as the chairperson.
Okay, go ahead. And I'll look at my stuff too. So. Okay.
Recording stopped.
Okay, we're going to call back to order, and I do apologize for the small break.
Recording in progress.
Okay. There's a small housekeeping matter that we have to take care of before we continue with our back and forth, and that is packet page number 158 and 159, and it's about the standing, and we have to make a motion to acknowledge that the appellants are in good standing as far as actual owners of the property. We know that from all of our supplemental paperwork. So I will make a motion.
Madam Chair. You're going to have to take public comment before you can take action on that.
Do we have any public comment?
Ellie Waller, I want to thank everybody again. These are interesting times. It's unfortunate some of the issues with whoever this Bill Smith person is. It's unfortunate that the transition between two companies as well, but it doesn't negate responsibility for filing your permit. It's much like paying taxes. April 15th comes, you pay your taxes. You know that's your date. Rules are set for a reason. Sometimes it's hard, and everybody does have hardships and cases. And the ordinance does state it's a courtesy to be notified. It's not codified that it's a county responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? Ms. Johnson, do you have any public comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a couple of people listening in, and Jennifer Hardcastle would like to provide public comments. Jennifer, I just want to verify that your public comment is going to be on item number 7. Is that correct? Jennifer, please look. I'm trying to ask to unmute your screen.
Okay, unmuted. Sorry about that.
Ms. Hardcastle.
So just to verify that this is going to be public comment on item number 7.
Yes.
Please state your name for the record, and they'll start your time.
Jennifer Hardcastle. So I just want to emphasize, I'm hearing that it's the owner's responsibility in this case to file their permit on the renewal date. In this case, that one email notification did not come, but similar to another case heard today, they received several other emails referring them to them as a permit holder. So I just, again, want you to consider in this case what it is like to be the recipient of those emails when there's only one email sent reminding you and multiple about collecting tax, receiving tax, etc. I think this is an important thing to consider in this case.
Thank you, Ms. Hardcastle. This motion we're talking about right now has to do with the standing of the appellant. Is there any other public comment on this, Ms. Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have one caller that I will check with. Natalie, do you have public comment on item number 7? No response. No further public comment at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Okay, at this time, I am going to make a motion that the appellants, Kevin and Joan Bartlett, have the standing to appeal this fine that has been paid and charged to them regarding a non-permitted VHR. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Byer. So I have a first from myself and a second from Mr. Byer. Oh, do we have any discussion on the matter? Mr. Sloan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So it kind of seems like, Madam Chair, may I ask the question to the appellates here or the people? Okay. It seems like, am I allowed to do that?
Are you asking questions to the appellants
Yes,
right now?
yes. Can I? Or do I ask it to?
We're going to open it up to discuss the matter further. We're just cleaning up an issue that we left out,
had already gone.
which was
I'm sorry.
approving their
Yes, I'm sorry.
standing.
I don't have any comments on that.
Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, Sam Taylor, for the record, Douglas County DAs. I just want to help the chair here sort of explain what's going on. Under Douglas County Code, in order to consider the merits of somebody's appeal and, quite frankly, favorably grant that appeal, you need to basically have a finding of standing to determine whether or not the person has the right to bring the appeal in the first place. There are certain instances when there's automatic standing, such as, and it's contained in packet page 158, and one of those is the person with legal or equitable interest in the property, which is the subject of the decision. In this case, and in most VHR complaints, it's going to be the people who own the property are the ones filing the appeal. I can't really think of a situation where that wouldn't be the case. You might have a corporation or some other entity that you might have a standing issue to deal with and wrestle with, and whether or not that person is authorized to act on behalf of the corporation. But other than that, in this particular case, I don't think there's any dispute as to whether or not the appellants own the property.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you. We have a unanimous decision. Now, let's go back to where we were. And I believe we had board members questioning the appellants. Mr. Sloan?
Madam Chair, thank you so much. Appellates, it seems like you're basing everything on the phone calls of Bill Smith. And did you ever ask Bill Smith to send you a text or any written correspondence saying, hey, this is okay to keep renting or anything like that? Just like your reaction to that.
No, I really wish I would have. Hindsight, right, is 20/20, right? I really try to keep really good notes, and my whole packet full of things that I've been trying to keep track of. So again, and to be honest, I had just was very sick with COVID at that time. I had just gotten out of the hospital, sick for almost 3 months with COVID. So in January, when we had that phone conversation, I was just getting better. So I don't know. I don't want to use that as an excuse, but it could have had something to do with
Mr.
it.
Byer?
I'm sorry, a very quick question. Did you say you have contemporaneous notes that you took the date of that call that you wrote down, that you had talked to Bill Smith and he said to continue renting? I understood you said you took good notes. Do you have contemporaneous notes of that call?
I have a note that I wrote. Let me grab it here. It wasn't about that specifically, but I did. And again, there was that other woman who said the exact same thing. So she said that Bill Smith had told her.
Yeah, sorry, it was just a very specific question that,
I know.
if you had taken a note at the date you had that call, it would mean more to me
I know.
than I don't know if you understand the question, but
Yeah.
if you had taken notes of the call, I mean, obviously if he had sent you an email, it'd been great.
Mm-hmm.
If you had sent him an email like thanks you for a call. As as you said, we're going to do this. That'd be great. But even a contemporaneous note would get me something that you took at the date you had the call.
I did write a note here, Bill Smith. I said meeting to see if we can finish processing, look for email from Bill. He will talk to Board of County Commissioners. He had told me he was going to be going, I tried to keep notes.
Sure, I understand.
I'm usually really good at it. And again, I was just recovering and on high dose of steroids.
I think if there's a question about if he said it or didn't say it or whatever, I think he can be asked if we want to continue. If that was an issue in this case, we can continue it and have him show up and speak to it. He said it, and I don't know if your systems are recorded. Maybe you can go back and check the recordings. The history is that he's been saying it. There's other people that's testified here at the hearings that said the same thing. So that's easy to prove. You can just go to that video. But he said it, and that's why we did it, because if he would have said, don't do it, you don't have a permit, we would have stopped.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I would have went to Kevin and said, hey, we got to stop. We got to pull it. He said to pull it, we need to pull it. But he never said that, and we would have. So we didn't have a problem.
I think Mr. Smith also realized that there was a lot of confusion and a lot of people calling on this very same issue, where their permits were expiring, and he was getting a lot of stuff coming into him about it. So I think that's why he said, go ahead and keep running, because we had already we turned in a new application like he asked us to.
There is a call center note here as well, so I don't know. Maybe there are some notes somewhere, or
I don't believe the calls at HDL are recorded, and it's kind of unfortunate because we don't have Mr. Smith here. However, anecdotally, when you have a corporation or a partnership of some sort, you don't get a bill from the Secretary of State for your annual renewal, and when you forget to do it, which I did many years ago, you got charged a penalty because you didn't remember to put on your calendar for a year from now that I have to pay my annual fees. And again, the privilege of having a permit is keeping track of when your renewal is due. Those are just a couple of comments that, come to mind as we listen to this. It's absolutely not a personal matter. It's a matter of maintaining the penalties and the rules as written in the ordinances. Does anyone else on the board? I'd like to hear some more comments. Anybody? Mr. Byer? Anybody, Mr. Byer?
Because let me tell you, this troubles me, but I'm putting it into two categories. I have heard nothing that Bill Smith had the authority to tell people to continue to rent their units. It bothers me that he would, but I don't know if that would usurp the law. I don't know if someone overstepping their authority, giving me bad legal counsel, means I'm not subject to the regulations anymore. And I'm struggling with that. But what I do come back to is that it is the appellate's responsibility to prove their case. I can't say if they had an affidavit from Bill Smith or Bill Smith showed up and said he said that. I'm not sure if that would be enough for me to say I understand. I would definitely understand. I don't know if that bad advice from a person not authorized to give it is enough. I had to make that because I'm going to a higher level that I think the appellate needs to prove their case. And I haven't seen proof that Bill Smith said this. It is interesting that this is the second person we've heard that from. But even if it was, I'm not sure that having an employee, or not even our employee, overstep their legal authority makes you not subject to the law. So I'm struggling with that on a couple of different levels. It would be good for us to know what Bill Smith said. And it would be good for us to know if Bill Smith was telling everybody who called to continue because he didn't like conflict. I can imagine he's having to deal with a lot of very irate people. There's a lot of money. Just like I said, just in this one, you can imagine the last person paid $400,000 of tax, or $40,000 of tax, $400,000 revenue. So I can imagine these people calling are irate, and maybe that's why he said it. It would be good for further cases for us to actually reach out and talk to him. But again, I'm still stuck with the appellate needs to prove their case, and I'm still stuck with, and I don't know if an employee overstepping their authority changes your responsibility under regulations.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes, Sam Taylor again for the record. I'm sort of confused where we're at in the stage right now in terms of, is the appellant still going to present more evidence, or are we now at the board, discussing the matter? I mean, where are we at in the process?
Thank you, Mr. Taylor, bringing me back to center. Unless you have more information, you can take your seats and we can discuss the matter up here.
Just on the last thing, whatever happens here today is just HDL and the way things are organized there. You need to get it in order. No offense. I know you guys are going to do what you're going to do, but this all could have been avoided. Not just me, not just Ms. Hardcastle. If you go back, going back, it's a kind of a mess. So you'll probably have another mess until it's straightened out. And the people that I've dealt with have been very nice. Mr. Delaire and Donna Arts was very nice, and everybody that we're dealing with are very good people and nice people, which is a great thing. So that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. Okay, public comment. Does anybody have anything from the chambers here? Okay. Ms. Johnson, do you have anybody? Oh, sorry. Oh, of all people to miss.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair. Eric Gavon for the record, Fire Marshal for Tahoe Douglas Fire Department. I just wanted to straighten one couple things out that I'm hearing in the gallery, and as an advisory to you. I'm hearing this gentleman, Mr. Smith, funny name, but that's it. But the county had actually reduced a fine for a lady, $50, for a lady who had said she talked to Mr. Smith. And so that's in county record. It's on where the county Board of County Commissioners actually rescinded her fine down to $50. So this name, Mr. Smith, has come up more than just the two individuals today, as well as there was a lot of confusion at the time, and I, as a regulatory body, had difficulty keeping up with the codes. It's like a painting a moving train, and we were doing our best to keep this information out. But I really want to stress the importance of even working with the county and working with the folks here. Our goal was to get the bad apples out and really punish those. And we've had several people that have been truly bad apples, and have been skirting the laws and not paying. I really have difficulty knowing that someone's paying TOT, which is going to our county, which is benefiting us, and they're paying it on time, and they're receiving notices from HDL that they are registered, even though they didn't. The gal that was here earlier, I know I shouldn't speak to that directly, but I just want to let you know there's a pattern that's developing. They did have an inspection from the fire department. They didn't have any violations. This couple did have a violation, and they fixed it right away. So there is that trend. And for me, the life safety was the big issue, and the fact that people were trying to get around us as a permitting body. And I just really think, I just caution you. I know that there should be some punishment perhaps for that, but I could, in dealing with HDL and there was a transition there that you have to understand that took place, and so there was a lot of confusion, even among ourselves. So I just ask that be reflected upon before you make a decision too hastily. Thank you again, and Fire Marshal Gavon for the record.
Thank you, sir. Any other public comment? Oh, online public comment. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Marcia Johnson for the record. If you would like to provide public comment on this item, item number 7, please raise your hand. I do have one caller. Natalie, do you have public comment on this item, item number 7? No response. No further public comment at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Let's take it back to the board then and see if there's any comments from everybody. Mr. Byer? Ms. Graff?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Madam Chair.
There you
Can't
go.
say that, okay. Just looking and understanding all the problems in the transition and everything. I know when I call the HDL people, I take their word, their employee, you know, whatever they recommend. If I have an issue, they're a body that is supposed to be knowledgeable. And I think there is belief on the Bartletts that this person knew what they were talking about. There's this transition, the confusion. He said to go ahead. I think if someone told me that, since this person's name keeps coming up, I think there needs to be another discussion about HDL and what the employees represent. They've continued, they had had their inspections. They found out that, I think in a timely manner after it expired, to get everything done, inspections, and have maintained the TOT. They didn't drop anything. They kept up everything as a responsible VHR permit holder, I think, other than lapsing for a couple of months. Thank you.
Any other board comments? Mr. Sloan?
Yes, it's me again, Michael Sloan for the record. Couple points of interest. It says that they actually rented many apartments from August 20th to June 21st. You know, that's a long time. That's almost 10 months, you know, going without a permit. It's not just a month or two. But I'm really struggling with this, what this Bill Smith is saying and what the fire marshal just told us about, that the commissioners, if I'm understanding it right, reduced it to $50. Is that, can I, Madam Chair, may I ask legal counsel, is that a true statement?
Mr. Taylor?
Sam Taylor for the record. I cannot state with specificity that Mr. Smith's name came up with respect to the appellant whose fine was reduced. I was present, but I just simply can't remember whether or not his name was invoked. If I recall correctly, I think for the most part, the person whose fine was reduced, it was reduced because of two principal reasons that I recall. The first of which was it was a tier 1 owner-occupied setting, and 2, the person made a really good case that it was a hardship for her, and you know, basically that, you know, she was a retired teacher from Douglas County, and there were mitigating circumstances with that regard. Again, I don't recall Mr. Smith being brought into that equation, but I'm not questioning Fire Marshal Gabon's memory as well. So,
Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
Do I still have the floor?
You may have the floor.
Okay. So where I'm coming from is one of two things. I think that there's been some poor decision-making on the appellates, but there might be some issues from the people that represent the county, and I would either like to go in one of two ways, either to amend the $5,000 total payment, or to suspend this hearing until a further date so that we can actually get Mr. Smith's notes from when he talked to the appellates. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sloan. It's my understanding that Mr. Smith is no longer with HDL. So I don't think we would probably be able to get notes. Mr. Byer?
I guess I would like to talk to legal counsel because, I'm human, right? And I absolutely understand you talk to someone on the phone and they have some authority, you don't know what their full authority is, and they give you bad advice. So I am sympathetic to that. Is there precedent in other hearings throughout the county where county employees or representatives of the county have exceeded their authority and given bad advice, which was relied on? I don't know if you understand the question, but I'm trying to say it bothers me that, I don't know what Mr. Smith said, but this is the second person who said it. And I'm trying to say if he said it, which again, I'm still troubled with, the appellate is supposed to prove that he said it, and their testimony is worth something, right? They're credible people. But let's assume for a second it was factual, that it was in evidence. Mr. Smith was here today and said, yes, I told him that. I just was tired of people yelling at me. Do we have precedents in the county where county officials or representatives of the county have given bad advice, relied upon, and how was that resolved?
Sam Taylor again for the record. I'm going to break this down sort of easily. The first of which is, if you heard testimony from Mr. and Mrs. Bartlett relative to this issue regarding the statements made by Mr. Smith. Normally in a court hearing, that would be hearsay, it would be barred, but in this type of hearing, in administrative proceedings, that sort of information is allowed all the time. You can consider it to the extent that you either believe the Bartletts or you do not. In other words, I don't necessarily think that you have to obtain other evidence in order to use the testimony from the Bartletts one way or another. So you can determine whether or not you find them credible in this regard and use it to whatever extent you find appropriate. With regard to the authority by HDL, in court cases, basically apparent authority or actual authority is an issue. And in the case of Mr. Bartlett and Mrs. Bartlett, actual authority or apparent authority is, were they reasonable in relying on what Mr. Smith was saying? That's kind of what it comes down. I'm trying to break this down as easily as I can. So is it reasonable for them to rely on what Mr. Smith told them, and could they rely on his authority to tell them that? If you find that that's the case, I think that you can say there was actual or apparent authority that Mr. Smith had in rendering this particular advice to the Bartletts. I would note, though, that it might be important to find out when Mr. Smith had those conversations with the Bartletts. Maybe we can get them on the record to testify that one way or another, because they're the only ones who provided that testimony, and determine whether or not that's relevant in the context of when they rented. In other words, if Mr. Smith was saying that in, say, for example, February through July of 2021, in other words, this was in response to the board doing the temporary suspension, and Mr. Smith was saying, yeah, go ahead and continue to rent, and it was related to that period of time. Well, there are potentially other dates where they rented which were outside that framework. So I think it's important to get on the record perhaps when those conversations with Mr. Smith occurred. And then I guess finally, the issue is, I don't think necessarily you need additional evidence or information regarding the notes, and I don't think Mr. Smith's presence is important one way or another. Again, you can judge the credibility of the Bartletts and determine whether or not they're telling the truth and act on that particular evidence.
Yes, it did, because I find the witnesses completely credible. I mean, if you go back to the case presented to the board, it was a school teacher, a first, we have a policeman, first responder. So I find them completely credible, but I do appreciate you bringing that up. And so if I understand correctly, I'm going down a decision tree. I find the witnesses completely credible. I believe Mr. Smith told them that. I believe 80-20, he had the apparent authority. Anytime I ask somebody and they tell me that there's a law, but don't worry about it, I have some concern in my back pocket. I may act on it, but I'm not 100% convinced of anybody I talk to. Maybe that's because I'm an accountant, right? I'm not convinced 100% of the time of anybody who tells me something that they're right, and especially when they're contradicting what is apparent. But I had not focused on what you said. There are two periods. There is a period between the time the permit was expired until the renewal, and if I understand correctly, but I would like to ask the question, the renewal period that they may have gotten bad advice, and so you may have two periods, one where you have a permit expired, there had not been a statement to continue to rent anyway, and then a period that we have applied and we were told to rent. So there might be two different periods with different facts and circumstances that resulted in actions, if that makes sense. And should we ask a question? I mean, or I would like to ask both Mr. DeLay, just to confirm my understanding, there is a period prior to their submission that they rented without a permit, and then ask the appellates when that advice was given. Was it during the approval, which I understood it to be, but I'd like to confirm it, that happened in February or March?
Thank you, Mr. Breyer. My notes, I show that their permit expired July 31st of 2020, and there was no holdup of permits back then. That wasn't until February of 21. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So there's a period between July 31st and whenever that February date was, when the permits were put on hold by the county, that they were renting without a permit because they'd not been notified that their permit had expired. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, January 29th is when HDL had sent an email stating that their permit expired back in July 31st of 2020, and that was January 29th of 2021.
So at this time, we might like to have the appellants come up and tell us when they discussed this matter with Mr. Smith.
The day we received the email on Friday, January 29th, 2021, I immediately picked the phone up and called the county office and spoke to tax specialist Bill Smith. He was the only person I could talk to, the only person that was running the show as far as I was concerned. Anyways, when I called him on January 29th, 2021, that's when we had the conversation. And then he kept telling me, call me back. I have a lot of people calling me back. It's okay for you to call me back. You don't call me back every day, but you can call me back like every Friday if you want. And I said, okay, I'll call you back. And I put it on my calendar, call Bill Smith, just to check in to see what's going on. And like I said, he said he was going to go to the Board of Commissioners meeting. So anyways.
Was his reason to have you call back to update you on the conditions that were going on here in Douglas
Yes.
County?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Byer?
I just want to ask a question, because we may have a lot of these where this becomes critical, but you keep referring to Mr. Smith as a tax specialist. And that makes perfect sense because his job is to collect TOT.
Right.
Is
That's
correct,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
In your mind, though, even though he is about obtaining tax from VHR rentals, did you believe that he had the apparent authority to tell you to violate the statutes in place?
Well, I mean,
I don't mean to put you, and by the way, I don't mean to be aggressive.
Yeah.
Things are always black and white in my brain until I talk to somebody else.
Yeah.
And then they get all murky. So I just wanted to confirm that with you and get your thoughts around that.
Well, I'm always about following the law. My husband is a retired police officer. And I always feel like he's still a police officer and that we have to follow the laws, so I really, when I just say,
Those are family secrets. You shouldn't be talking like that.
but really, I just say, that I follow the law. He said it was okay. I believed him. He said, you're in limbo. And he said, oh, you're lucky because you got it in on the 17th and the 18th is when they closed it down. So I didn't know, what he meant. I just said, okay, that sounds good. I guess we're lucky, and again, he said limbo. He said those words, limbo. You're in limbo right now because there's nothing we can do right now. We have to wait for the Board of Commissioners to make the decisions on what they were going to, make these new laws and legislation and stuff. So.
Thank you for that information. Does anybody have any other questions for them while they're here at the microphone? Mr. Sloan?
Thank you, Ms. Chair. Go back and forth on that. So the timeline is your permit expired on July 30th of 2020, and you got the email in January of 21-ish, somewhere around there. I don't know the exact date. So we still did have 5 or 6 months of renting without a permit.
Unknowingly renting without a permit.
We're getting the bills saying, your permit holder this and that.
Here's your TOT.
We had no idea it was expired.
We figure it just kind of goes hand in hand. We need,
That's obviously one of the problems with the HDL is if they would have let us know a week after, a month after, 2 months after, it would have been a lot different than 6 months, right?
Madam Chair, may I ask a question of staff?
Yes, Mr. Sloan.
Okay, thank you. So if you have an expired permit, how come the emails keep coming in for the TOT requests? I mean, shouldn't it be tied in, or am I getting off on a tangent here?
I'll try and answer that. The permitting, I believe back in July, I want to say, is when we got a contract with HDL and to actually do the permitting for our VHR program here in Douglas County. We changed from host compliance, which was a program basically the staff had to operate and run, and it was taking a lot more staff to monitor that than we had. That's why we went to this. Additionally, our finance department utilized HDL for the commercial TOT collections, and this was a service also offered by HDL. So we modified the contract that the finance department had, and community development entered into a contract with them as well with HDL in order to provide that service of actually helping with the permitting. So they were watching now the permitting, and they were also dealing with the TOT tax collections as well. The way it was pitched to us is that helps HDL's process in knowing who the permittees are, and then turning around and making sure that they're compliant with the TOT payments. And I think that's why their system is set up really like a business license, is what I think is how their system is set up. So on the TOT side, they send annual reminders, and then there's this permitting side over here that doesn't appear to me that they're communicating very well together in the same system. And so that's what we've been trying to work through on our end, is to communicate, better and more clearly with HDL, and then getting their staff trained on our process, and with this code changing the process substantially as far as our permitting and what we're actually asking people for, it has caused a lot of confusion, on their end, because we're pretty unique in that we are requiring quite a bit of information from them now. And anyway, their permittees are the ones that are helping and assisting, or their staff is helping and assisting our applicants through that permit process. Does that help?
Thank you, Mr. Dallaire.
Madam Chair, if I can add to that, please.
Yes, Ms. Davidson.
Thank you. Jennifer Davidson, Assistant County Manager, for the record. As part of the review of the administrative processes for VHR permits, one of the primary complaints that we were noticing initially on the county operational side of things is that people were forgetting to pay their TOT. And so, frankly, the reason why we started sending monthly reminders was so that we could collect the taxes that we were owed pursuant to the ordinance. And I can tell you, as a result of this creation of this step, revenue for this program went from $1.5 million, around the $2 million mark, to now over $4 million, because we remind people to pay the taxes that they owe Douglas County. What's interesting is this same argument was being made when we found people in violation because they weren't paying their taxes and they had to pay fines and fees associated. People made the same argument, well, where was my reminder to pay my taxes? So we created a process, and yes, the left hand may not be communicating to the right, but the obligation still exists, and the section of the ordinance is very clear that the obligation is on the permit holder to pay their taxes and to renew their permit on a timely manner.
Thank you, Ms. Davidson. Any more comments from the board? Ms. Romaine?
Please. Thank you. A question for the staff. What is the process after this? Is there an appeals to the Board of County Commissioners after this?
If the appellant today wants to appeal your decision, it could go to the Board of County Commissioners.
I'm not saying that I like that process, but I do feel, and unfortunately, a new process here, and we're talking about things that came up at a Board of County Commissioners meeting, which, of course, we have no idea whether it did or it did not come up, and I'm having a real hard time. Maybe it did. Maybe they made a different decision because of this Mr. Smith. I'm not sure. I don't know. And I just didn't want there to be no avenue at all for there to be some kind of recourse if this was. However, I'd have to admit I'm with Mr. Byer on the fact that I'm not sure it makes a difference to me, because somebody tells you something that's not correct does not mean that you can do something that's illegal. I understand what you're saying that as far as hearsay goes, that hearsay it's not but I'm having a really difficult time. They seem like wonderfully fine people, but I have, just because two people have said that Mr. Smith told them they could do something, if it's out in the public purview, then 5 people could come in and say, I've talked with Mr. Smith, and unfortunately there's no, and I've been in this situation myself where I know I've done something and I didn't write it down either, so I understand that part, but I'm having a real difficult time with trying to process through the hearsay. It is incumbent on the appellant to prove it, and I'm just not hearing that. I think the one thing, and I know that this kind of goes into other things, but I think it is coming through loud and clear just on our first meeting that going forward, I don't know if a letter needs to be written to HDL to clarify this and to be very straightforward about the fact that this seems to whether it's an issue or not an issue, I don't know, but we'd be remiss after it came up to not address it and say to them, this is not something that your people, and please make sure that that's the case. But just like Ms. Davidson said, and in my HOA, we have the same problem. If you send out a reminder, then they wait for the reminder, even though it says in our CC&Rs that it's the owner's responsibility to make sure that stays up, that they renew. So I think in a way that we can maybe do both things. I understand TOT and government's really good at bringing in the money, maybe not so great at the customer service side to things, but I think we can. However, I think it needs to be clearly stated that it is the owner's responsibility to ensure, you do it once again. But I get that same thing in our HOA, because you want to be helpful, but at the same time you're helpful, and then it comes back to bite you. I think that's my comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Romaine. I guess the part that just eats at me, and I agree with everyone's comments that you're wonderful people, I'm sure, but there was that 6 months or so before the conversation with Mr. Smith that you were operating without a permit, and that's where I'm kind of struggling with it. That although you didn't, realize you didn't have one, it is clear that that is on the permit holder to maintain a renewal in a timely manner. So with that said, unless there's any more comments, I will do, you may, yes, of course.
On this issue is we had been getting renewals every year before the last year, so it was something that we look forward to. Yeah, we're going to get a bill that our permit's expired. So you kind of get into, I get what you're saying. Technically, yeah, we violated the law. That's just plain and simple, because our permit expired. But there's a lot of minutia in between, and you're going to do what you're going to do, and I understand it's not personal. But at the end of the day, it needs to be fixed. That's all. And I'll sit down now.
Thank you. I think we should call for the vote. Does anyone have, or a motion? Yeah. Does anyone have a motion?
Yes, and as a predicate, I will say I believe the appellate that they were given bad advice. I believe their actions after that bad advice have some understanding. And so based solely on the period from the time their permit expired until they got that bad advice, I believe that VHR owners have a responsibility to renew their permit on their own accord without reminders. And so therefore I move to deny the appeal of the $5,000 fine for renting vacation home rentals 41 times without a permit based on the evidence submitted and the testimony presented.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Yes, Ms. Graff.
Madam Chair, Patty Graff. Listening to them and looking at their records and everything, I would like to add to the motion, and if I'm wrong about this, maybe the staff can correct me on this, by denying their appeal in this motion to have this fine gone, that also negates their current permit.
I believe that these are the two separate issues. The permit being issued on July 15th was because as soon as staff could issue a permit, is different than them renting, from August or July 31st through February when they found out or January, end of January when they found out their permit had expired. I think those are two separate issues. It wasn't my intent to revoke their permit from that we had issued in July. What our intent was is that when staff found out that this had occurred, we sent a letter off like we had a number of others in the county, and we were trying to treat everybody in a similar fashion, and then bring these, if they appealed, then they bring them to the body for them to make this decision. I can't, as the director, I want to make it sure that what we do is consistent with everybody, not special treatments to specific individuals. So that's where we're coming from with this.
Madam Chair, maybe ask legal if this appeal gets denied, does that negate their current permit?
Thank you, Ms. Graff. That's a really good question, and I had a note somewhere that I missed to ask that question. Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, Madam Chair, again, Sam Taylor, Douglas County DAs for the record. No, your finding of the appeal on this particular case does not negate their permit in one way, shape, or form. As Mr. Dallaire indicated, he intends to keep the permit in place, the existing permit that has been issued, and I think that's consistent with past practice and what we discussed, previously. So.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Okay, so I have a motion. Mr. Sloan, do you have a comment?
Yes, and I think you know my position. I don't think things are black and white. I think that there are mitigating circumstances, and they've made mistakes. But I think the county has too, probably. So I think that there should be an amended amount, and but you'll get my vote.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Taylor?
I'd just like to point out for the record and for the edification of all board members that any member can move to amend an existing motion. Basically what you need is the approval of the motion maker and also the person who made the second. So if you wanted to amend the motion, you could. And what you would do then in that case, Madam Chair, is you would vote on the amendment. And then if the amendment fails, then you would vote on the main motion as it originally stood. But if the amendment passes, then you would vote on the main motion subject to the amendment.
Man, sorry, I want to make sure I understood you because it's surprising to me. My understanding was if he made a motion to amend my motion, it could receive a second from anybody but me. And if that passed, then my motion was automatically amended. Did I hear you right that if he wants to amend my motion, I have to agree to it?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, so he would make an amendment, someone would second it, and we would vote on it.
That's right. Yeah.
And then if that passed, then my amendment would be automatically, and then we would vote on my motion. Okay. So.
Oh, God. Sorry. I'm usually pretty good at that. I just messed it up this time. Sometimes, if you like the person's amendment, you can move to withdraw your original motion and then have the amended motion be the main motion. And that's what I was talking about, needing the permission. I should have explained that better. I did a poor job of that. My apologies.
Madam Chairman, keep fire for the record. And let me explain why I won't retract my previous motion. And I agree this joint responsibility. My belief is that joint responsibility doesn't necessarily start with $5,000. The revenues during this period were significant, and I believe the $5,000 is in the policy, and the $5,000 is relevant to the period of which they rented with an expired permit before they were given bad advice. And again, I find we'd almost need to create a menu of modifications. If we had this kind of fault, it'd be this minus amount. So, and I've said it before, so I don't withdraw my amendment, but I think you have an amendment to my amendment that we would now ask for a second and vote on that amendment, right?
It needs a second. Did somebody second his amendment?
Okay, well, he hasn't, I don't believe you've given me a dollar amount. Okay, so Mr. Sloan, do you have an amendment?
By chance I do. I move to amend the original amendment and second to be half, $2,500 plus the $300 for the administration fee. So $2,800 total would be my amended amount. Thank you.
Do I have a second on Mr. Sloan's amendment?
I'll second that amendment.
Okay, I'm going to call for a vote on the amendment of Mr. Sloan's amendment. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed,
Nay.
nay.
What was the vote, actually? Okay.
Going to call for the vote on the original motion made by Mr. Byer, second by Ms. Romaine. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed,
Nay.
the motion passes 3-2. Closing public comment. Does anybody from the room have any comments to make? Ms. Johnson, do you have anybody online?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Marcia Johnson for the record. I do have one caller I'll check with. Natalie, do you have closing public comments?
No, thank you.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I said no, thank you, though.
Okay, thank you. No further closing public comment at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Then this meeting is adjourned.